In this video, we're breaking down 3 hours of Family Guy mysteries and theories. Let's get started. Starting with something that should bother you more than it does. Family Guy has been on the air since January 31st, 1999. It premiered right after Super Bowl 33, pulled in over 22 million viewers on its debut night, and for a brief, shining moment, it looked like Fox had found its next animated hit. Seth MacFarlane was 25 years old. He had pitched a 15-minute pilot to Fox executives in May of 1998, built around characters he'd originally created in 2 short films at the Rhode Island School of Design called The Life of Larry and Steve. Fox liked what they saw. They greenlit the series, and for 3 seasons, Family Guy was a sharp, grounded, surprisingly warm family sitcom wrapped inside a cartoon about a fat guy in Rhode Island. Peter Griffin was dumb, but he loved his family. Lois was patient, but she had an edge. Meg was awkward, but her parents actually cared about her. Chris was spacey, but harmless. Stewie was a homicidal British supervillain, plotting world domination and the murder of his own mother. And Brian was an alcoholic talking dog who went to therapy. Even the weird parts had a logic to them. The show had a rhythm. It had a tone. It felt like a specific thing made by a specific person with a specific vision. And then Fox killed it. The first cancellation came after season 2. Ratings had dropped because Fox kept moving the show around the schedule. They put it on Thursdays against Frasier, which was pulling massive numbers on NBC. The audience couldn't find it. Fox pulled the plug, then changed their mind at the last second and gave it a 3rd season. But season 3 got an even worse deal. They slotted it on Thursday nights at 8 o'clock, directly opposite Friends, the most watched show in America during the 2001 television season. And just to make sure it couldn't survive, CBS was running Survivor in the exact same time slot. Family Guy was a quirky animated comedy, competing against 2 of the biggest juggernauts in broadcast history simultaneously. The ratings fell off a cliff. Fox cancelled the show for real in 2002. The final episode of season 3 didn't even air on Fox. It sat on a shelf for over a year before finally showing up on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim block in November of 2003. That's how little Fox cared about the show by the end. They couldn't even be bothered to broadcast its last episode, and that should have been the end of the story. A cancelled cartoon from the early 2000s that ran for 3 seasons and faded into obscurity. Except something happened that had never happened before in the history of American television. Fox tried to sell the rerun rights. Nobody wanted them. Networks passed. The show was dead, the ratings were bad, and nobody saw a reason to invest in a cartoon that couldn't hold an audience. Then Cartoon Network picked up the rights for what the president of 20th Century Fox Television described as basically nothing. They paid almost nothing for it. And they started airing Family Guy on their Adult Swim late-night block starting April 20th, 2003. The results were immediate and staggering. Family Guy became Adult Swim's #1 program overnight. Viewership for the block jumped by 239%. The show was averaging 1.9 million viewers per episode in a late-night cable time slot, which is a number that most primetime network shows would kill for. At the exact same time Fox released the 1st and 2nd seasons on DVD, the sets sold 2.2 million copies within months, making Family Guy the best-selling television DVD of 2003 and the 2nd highest-selling television DVD of all time, behind only the 1st season of Chappelle's Show. Think about that for a second. A show that Fox threw away because nobody was watching it became the most popular thing on late-night cable and the best-selling TV DVD in the country, all within the same year. The audience was always there. Fox just couldn't find them because Fox kept hiding the show behind time slot changes and scheduling chaos and expecting it to survive against the biggest ratings machines on television. In 2004, Fox did something unprecedented. They ordered a new season of episodes and brought the show back. Family Guy became the first television series in history to be revived by the same network based on DVD sales. The first episode of Season 4 aired on May 1st, 2005, and it pulled the show's highest ratings since its very first season. In the opening scene, Peter Griffin turns to the camera and lists every show that Fox had tried and failed with since Family Guy was cancelled. The list goes on for nearly a full minute. Dark Angel, Titus, Undeclared, Action, That 80s Show, Wonderfalls, Fastlane, Andy Richter, Controls the Universe, Skin, Girls Club, Cracking Up, The Pits, Firefly, The Tick. Dozens of shows that Fox bet on instead of Family Guy, and every single one of them failed. Then Peter says, "Well, if all those shows fail, maybe we'll have a chance." The audience laughed. The theme song played, and Family Guy was back. But here's the thing nobody wanted to say out loud. The show that came back wasn't the same show that left. The characters were different. Not slightly different, fundamentally different. Peter Griffin went from a lovable idiot who made stupid decisions but genuinely cared about his wife and kids to something closer to a sociopath. A man who would assault his own daughter for a laugh, endanger his children without a flicker of remorse, and treat the people around him with a casual cruelty that the original Peter would never have been capable of. Meg Griffin went from an awkward teenager whose parents loved her to the designated punching bag of the entire family. A girl whose own father forgets she exists, whose mother openly despises her, whose brother treats her like a subhuman creature. The Meg of seasons 1 through 3 had storylines about trying to fit in at school, about crushes and insecurities and the normal painful mess of being a teenager. The Meg of season 4 onward exists to be humiliated. Stewie Griffin went from a supervillain to a neurotic, sexually confused toddler whose world domination schemes gradually disappeared and were replaced by anxiety, loneliness, and an increasingly complex relationship with the family dog. The original Stewie built weapons and plotted the death of Lois Griffin with single-minded determination. The new Stewie plucks his own hair from stress and lets therapists die to protect his secrets. Brian Griffin went from a witty, self-aware intellectual to a pretentious, failed novelist who treats women terribly, lectures everyone around him about politics and morality while being a complete hypocrite, and slowly descended into an alcoholism that the show stopped playing for charm and started playing for despair, and the tone of the show itself shifted in ways that are hard to describe unless you go back and watch the first 3 seasons in a row and then immediately start season 4. The jokes got darker, the cutaways got more violent, the storylines became more surreal, more detached from anything resembling domestic reality. The show stopped being about a family and started being about cruelty administered through the structure of a family. Fans have been arguing about this shift for 20 years. The internet calls it Flanderization, after the Simpsons character Ned Flanders, whose personality was gradually exaggerated until he became a caricature of himself. Every long-running animated show goes through some version of this process. Characters become louder, broader, more extreme, as writers search for new ways to generate conflict and comedy from people the audience already knows. But a fan theory that has gained serious traction online, originally proposed by a Reddit user called HoHoswakiQuest, offers a different explanation. The theory argues that pre-cancellation Family Guy and post-cancellation Family Guy aren't just different versions of the same show. They are literally 2 different universes. The reasoning goes like this. Family Guy's own canon establishes that parallel universes exist. In Road to the Multiverse, Season 8, Episode 1, Stewie and Brian use a device to travel between alternate realities and discover versions of Quahog where the rules are completely different. Dogs rule over humans in one universe. Disney animation principles govern another. The show explicitly tells you that there are infinite versions of the Griffin family living infinite different lives across infinite different realities. And in Back to the Pilot Season 10 Episode 5, Brian and Stewie travel back in time to the very first episode of the show. When they arrive, they're visibly struck by how different everything looks and feels. The animation is cruder. The characters behave differently. The tone is unrecognizable compared to what the show has become. Brian and Stewie aren't just revisiting old footage, they're experiencing a version of their own reality that no longer matches the one they currently live in. The theory argues that the 3-year gap between cancellation and revival wasn't just a production hiatus, it was a boundary. When the show came back in 2005, it didn't pick up where it left off. It started fresh in a parallel universe where the same family exists, but the rules are darker, the characters are crueler, and the consequences are more extreme. The reason the post-cancellation show feels like a different show is because it is a different show. The Griffins we've been watching since season 4 are not the same Griffins we met in 1999. They look the same, they sound the same. They live at the same address in the same fictional town. But they're meaner, stranger, and more broken than the originals ever were. And here's the parts that stays with you. If this theory is true, then the original Griffin family, the one from seasons 1 through 3, the version of Peter who loved his daughter, and Meg who was loved by her parents, and Stewie who had grand ambitions, and Brian who still had his dignity, that family's still out there somewhere. In a universe we can't get back to, living a life we'll never see again. They didn't change. We just stopped watching them. And the versions that replaced them, the ones we've been watching for 20 years, are darker reflections living in a world where everything that made the originals charming has been stripped away and replaced with something harder. The show that died twice and came back wrong. That's not a criticism, that's a theory. And the more episodes you watch, the more the evidence piles up. Because the Family Guy that exists today bears so little resemblance to the show that premiered after the Super Bowl in 1999 that the simplest explanation isn't creative evolution. The simplest explanation is that we're watching a different show entirely. We just haven't been told. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the story that almost erased everything you just heard. Everything about Family Guy, the cancellation, the revival, the 20+ years of episodes that followed, all of it almost never happened. Because on September 11th, 2001, Seth MacFarlane was supposed to die. This isn't speculation. This isn't a fan theory. This is documented, verified history that MacFarlane himself has discussed publicly on multiple occasions across interviews with CNN, Howard Stern, The Adam Carolla Show, and Piers Morgan Tonight. The facts are these. On the evening of September 10th, 2001, Seth MacFarlane was in Rhode Island. He had been giving a lecture at his alma mater, the Rhode Island School of Design. After the talk, he went out for drinks with some of the faculty. He had a few too many. He stayed out too late. He woke up the next morning with a hangover. He was booked on American Airlines Flight 11, departing from Boston's Logan International Airport, bound for Los Angeles. His travel agent had listed the departure time on his itinerary as being about 10 to 15 minutes later than it actually was. Between the hangover and the incorrect time, MacFarlane arrived at the airport late. When he got to the counter and told the woman he was booked on Flight 11, she told him he was too late. The gate had just closed. He couldn't board. MacFarlane took it in stride. He asked to be rebooked on the next available flight, which was leaving a couple of hours later. He walked into the airport lounge, sat down, and fell asleep. He woke up approximately 45 minutes later to the sound of commotion around him. The first plane had hit the World Trade Center. He sat there in the lounge and watched on the television monitors as the second plane struck the South Tower. And then they announced which flight had hit the North Tower. It was American Airlines Flight 11, the flight he had been booked on. The flight he missed by minutes because he drank too much the night before, and his travel agent wrote down the wrong time. 81 passengers were on that flight, 11 crew members. All 92 people on board were killed. Among the dead were David Angel, a co-creator and executive producer of Frasier, and his wife, Lynn. Among the dead was Daniel Lewin, the co-founder of Akamai Technologies. Among the dead was Berry Berenson, the actress and photographer. Among the dead was Robert Grant Norton, who at 85 years old was the oldest victim of the September 11th attacks. Seth MacFarlane was supposed to be among them. A hangover and a scheduling error saved his life. In a 2009 interview with Howard Stern, MacFarlane was asked how the experience affected him. His answer was surprisingly measured. He said it rattled him for the first few weeks, but he didn't think about it much after that. He described himself as someone who isn't much of a fate person. He said coincidences happen. He'd missed flights before for similar reasons. He didn't attach cosmic significance to the near miss. He just went on living. But here's where it gets layered. Because MacFarlane may not have changed his worldview, but the question of whether the experience changed his art is a different conversation entirely. In 2005, the direct-to-DVD movie Stewie Griffin. The untold story was released, later recut into 3 episodes that aired as Season 4 episodes 27 through 29 when the show returned to Fox. In the film, Stewie has a near-death experience involving a tower that he blew up. The explosion nearly kills him. The central plot of the movie revolves around Stewie travelling back in time to prevent this event from happening. And in one scene, after successfully stopping the disaster, Stewie shouts the line, "Yes, I did it. I stopped the tower from falling." Fan theorists have pointed to this as MacFarlane processing his 9/11 experience through the fiction of the show, a man who was supposed to be in a tower that fell, writing a story about a character who goes back in time to stop a tower from falling. The connection isn't subtle. The imagery isn't accidental. Whether MacFarlane intended the parallel consciously, or whether it seeped into the writing through the kind of unconscious processing that creative people do with trauma, the thematic overlap is unmistakable. And this isn't the only time the show dealt with September 11th directly. In the season 10 episode Back to the Pilot, Brian convinces Stewie to go back in time to the pilot episode of Family Guy, which originally aired in January 1999. While they're in the past, Brian decides to prevent the September 11th attacks by warning his past self about what's going to happen. He succeeds, the attacks are averted, and the consequences are catastrophic. Without 9/11, the timeline splits in a direction so destructive that it triggers a second American Civil War. The world falls apart, everything gets worse. Brian's attempt to fix the biggest tragedy in modern American history only creates a bigger one. The episode's thesis is bleak and deliberate. Some events are so woven into the fabric of reality that removing them doesn't make the world better. It makes the world unrecognizable, and the only way to restore order is to go back and let the terrible thing happen again. For a comedy show, that's an extraordinarily dark position to take. And for a show created by a man who was personally supposed to be on one of those planes, it carries a weight that goes beyond satire. MacFarlane lived because the attacks happened the way they happened, on the timeline they happened. If anything about that morning had been different, if his travel agent had given him the correct time, if he'd had one fewer drink the night before, if the gate agent had waited 2 more minutes, Seth MacFarlane boards Flight 11 and Family Guy ends at Season 3. No revival, no American Dad, no Ted, no Orville, no 400+ episodes, no $3 billion in revenue for Fox, no cultural footprint that stretches across 2.5 decades of American entertainment. The entire Seth MacFarlane media empire, everything he has ever created since September 12th, 2001, exists because a hangover made him 10 minutes late to an airport gate. And the show itself seems to know this, not in a way that MacFarlane has ever acknowledged publicly, but in the way the writing returns to themes of fate, near misses, alternate timelines, and the fragility of existence with a frequency that goes beyond coincidence. Family Guy has more time travel episodes than almost any other animated sitcom. Stewie builds and rebuilds time machines across dozens of episodes. Brian and Stewie visit alternate realities where small changes produce radically different outcomes. The show is obsessed with the idea that reality is thin, that it can crack under the weight of a single moment, and that the version of the world we're living in is only one of many possible versions, separated from the disaster by the width of a missed alarm or a mislabeled itinerary. Maybe that's just good science fiction writing. Maybe it's just the kind of premise that generates interesting stories. But for a show made by a man who missed American Airlines Flight 11 by the length of a hangover, the obsession with alternate timelines reads as something more personal than a plot device. It reads like a man who understands, in a way that most people never have to understand, that the line between the life you're living and the life you almost didn't get to live is so thin it barely exists at all. Seth MacFarlane doesn't talk about it much. He's said publicly that he's not a fate guy. He doesn't attach spiritual meaning to the near miss. He treats it as a statistical anomaly, the kind of thing that happens in a world of 7 billion people where improbable events occur every single day. And maybe he's right. Maybe a hangover saving your life from a terrorist attack is just a coincidence, cold and meaningless and unworthy of the weight we want to assign to it. But the show he created after surviving that coincidence is a show that cannot stop thinking about what happens when reality splits, about the versions of the world where things go differently, about the people who exist in one timeline and not another, and about the question that every time travel story eventually asks, which is whether the life you're living is the right one or just the one you ended up in because the gate closed 10 minutes early. Family Guy exists because Seth MacFarlane got drunk the night before. That's the foundational fact of the show's existence post-2001. And every episode that has aired since, every joke, every cutaway, every storyline about alternate realities and time travel, and the butterfly effect of small decisions cascading into enormous consequences, all of it carries the invisible weight of a morning in September when the creator of the show was supposed to board a plane and didn't. He fell asleep in the lounge. He woke up to the commotion. And the world he woke up into was the one where Family Guy would come back from the dead and run for another 2 decades and counting. Whether that's fate or coincidence or just the random cruelty of a universe that doesn't care who gets on which plane, the result is the same. Seth MacFarlane is alive. The show is still running. And somewhere in the space between a missed flight and a hangover, the entire future of American animated comedy was decided. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the character who might be the most complex figure in the history of American animated television. Not Homer Simpson, not Cartman, not BoJack Horseman, Stewie Griffin. A 1-year-old baby who has been 1 year old for over 25 years, who speaks in a clipped British accent that doesn't match anyone else in his family, who has built functioning time machines and interdimensional teleportation devices and weapons of mass destruction in his bedroom, and who, in one canonical episode of the show, accidentally created the entire universe. And also, a child who plucks his own hair from anxiety, lets people die to protect his emotional vulnerabilities, and once sat in a therapist's office and admitted that everything about his personality, every single thing that makes him Stewie Griffin, is a mask he built to survive. Let's start at the beginning, seasons 1 through 3. Stewie is a character drawn with clean, sharp lines. He wants 2 things. He wants to kill Lois, his mother, and he wants to conquer the world. That's it. Those are his motivations. He pursues them with the focused intensity of a Bond villain compressed into the body of an infant. He builds ray guns. He constructs elaborate traps. He delivers monologues about power and domination with a theatrical precision that would be terrifying if he weren't wearing a diaper. The original Stewie is not complicated. He is evil, brilliant, and driven. He is the funniest character on early Family Guy because his ambition is so wildly disproportionate to his physical reality. He is a baby. He cannot walk reliably. He cannot reach the kitchen counter. And he genuinely believes he he can subjugate the human race. The gap between what Stewie wants and what Stewie physically is generates the comedy. You laugh because a baby shouldn't be this calculating. You laugh because the menace is real, but the vessel is absurd. Then the show got cancelled, and when it came back, Stewie was different. The world domination plots became less frequent. The lowest murder attempts faded into background noise and eventually disappeared almost entirely. In their place, something more interesting emerged. Stewie started showing vulnerability. He developed a relationship with Brian that went from antagonistic to something resembling genuine friendship, then something resembling dependence, then something resembling love in the most complicated and least romantic sense of that word. Stewie and Brian became the emotional centre of the post-revival show, not Peter and Lois. The Road to Episodes, a series of adventure specials that sent Stewie and Brian to increasingly absurd locations, became the show's creative highlights. Not because they were funnier than regular episodes, but because they were the only episodes where the show let its characters be genuinely emotional without immediately undercutting it with a cutaway gag. Stewie's sexuality became a recurring theme. The show played it for laughs at first, but over time, the jokes started carrying more weight. Stewie's attraction to men was treated less like a punchline and more like a secret he was managing. His anxiety increased. His aggression became more defensive than offensive. The baby who once wanted to destroy the world started looking more like a child who wanted to be understood by it. And then came the 300th episode, Season 16, Episode 12. Send in Stewie, please. This is the episode that broke the character wide open. And if you haven't seen it, nothing I'm about to describe will prepare you for what it actually feels like to watch. The entire episode takes place in a single room. There are no cutaway gags. There is no B-plot about Peter doing something stupid. There is no slapstick. There is no violence. It is 22 minutes of Stewie sitting in the office of a child psychologist named Dr. Cecil Pritchfield and talking. That's it. A baby and a therapist having a conversation. And it is one of the most devastating episodes of television the show has ever produced. Stewie begins the session with his usual defences. He's sarcastic. He's combative. He analyses the therapist with surgical precision, deducing intimate details about the man's personal life within minutes of meeting him. He performs intelligence the way a magician performs card tricks, dazzling and deflecting simultaneously. He does not want to be known. He wants to be impressive. But Dr. Pritchfield is good at his job. He's patient. He doesn't rise to Stewie's provocations. He doesn't flinch at the insults. He just waits. And slowly, over the course of the episode, Stewie's armour starts to crack. Stewie admits that he's lonely. He says it plainly without flourish. And the moment he does, he starts to cry. Not cartoon crying, not exaggerated sobbing played for comedy. Genuine, quiet tears from a child who has spent his entire existence constructing an elaborate persona to avoid feeling the thing he just admitted to feeling. The doctor observes that Stewie is an outcast at school. Stewie doesn't deny it. He talks about pushing another student down the stairs. He talks about his fascination with musicals and his frustration at not being on Broadway. He has a tantrum. He gets hiccups. He snots. The baby genius, who built a time machine, can't control his own body when his emotions get the better of him. And then the conversation turns to the accent. Stewie brings it up himself. He asks the doctor if he's noticed it. The doctor has, of course, but he doesn't push. Stewie circles around the subject for a while, poking at it without committing, and then he does something that, in the context of 25 years of Family Guy, is seismic. He drops the accent. Stewie speaks in his real voice. It's an ordinary American child's voice. There is nothing British about it. There is nothing theatrical about it. It is the voice of a regular kid from Rhode Island who's been performing a character for his entire conscious life. The accent is fake. It was always fake. Stewie tells the therapist that the persona, the British affectation, the villainy, the grandiosity, All of it is a coping mechanism. He built the character of Stewie Griffin the way an actor builds a role, because the alternative, being himself, being ordinary, being just another kid in a town that doesn't particularly care about kids, was too frightening to face. The real Stewie, the one under the accent, is a scared, lonely, brilliant child who doesn't know how to connect with other people. He uses intelligence as a weapon because vulnerability feels like death. He performs menace because it gives people a reason to pay attention to him, even if the attention is negative. He would rather be feared than ignored. He would rather be a cartoon villain than a real child, because real children get hurt and villains don't. The therapist sees all of this. He responds with empathy. He shares his own story of growing up as an outcast in wartime England, of losing his parents, of being passed through orphanages, of building a persona to survive in a world that didn't want him. He tells Stewie that he understands because he did the same thing, and for a moment Stewie considers it. He considers dropping the mask permanently. He considers letting the real version of himself exist in the world. He sits with the possibility of being known, truly known, by another person. And then he decides not to. He puts the accent back on. He rebuilds the walls. He returns to being the version of himself that keeps people at a distance, because being at a distance is safer than being close. And then, in the final moments of the episode, the therapist begins having a heart attack. He collapses, he's dying, and Stewie watches him die. He doesn't call for help. He doesn't try to save him. He lets the one person who saw through his facade, the one person who understood what he was doing and why, he lets that person die. Because if the therapist lives, the secret is out. Someone knows. Someone has seen the real Stewie and can testify to his existence, and Stewie cannot allow that. After the doctor dies, Stewie goes home. Brian asks him if he's okay. Stewie says he did something awful, but he doesn't elaborate. He puts Brian to bed, and the episode ends. That's the 300th episode of Family Guy. Not a celebration, not a clip show, not a musical number or a crossover event. A baby admitting that everything about himself is a lie, briefly considering the possibility of honesty, and then choosing the lie again because the truth is too dangerous. Now let's go deeper, because the show has given us other pieces of the Stewie puzzle, and when you put them together, the picture that emerges is genuinely disturbing. In The Big Bang Theory, Season 9, Episode 16, Stewie and Brian are fighting over a time travel device. They accidentally launch themselves outside the space-time continuum. To get back, Stewie overloads his return pad, causing an explosion. After they make it home, Stewie does some research and discovers something that changes the scope of his character entirely. His explosion was the Big Bang. Stewie Griffin created the universe. Let that settle. A 1-year-old baby who will lose his intelligence at puberty, who we know is performing a fake accent to hide his real self, who allows people to die rather than be emotionally vulnerable. That baby is the literal creator of all existence. He made the universe by accident while fighting with a dog over a time machine. And the show treats this revelation as a plot point in a single episode, and then moves on. But the implications are staggering. If Stewie created the universe, then Stewie created himself. He created his parents. He created Quahog. He created Brian. He created the conditions that would lead to his own birth and his own genius and his own eventual loss of that genius. Stewie is a temporal paradox wrapped in a diaper. He is the alpha and the omega of his own continuity. And he will lose the ability to understand any of this before he's old enough to shave. Which brings us to the cruelest piece of Stewie's story. Baby Stewie, Season 18, Episode 15. In this episode, Brian shows Stewie video evidence that he will lose his extraordinary intelligence when he hits puberty. The proof is Chris. Chris Griffin was smart as a baby. The show provides footage, and then puberty happened, and Chris became, well, Chris. The implication is explicit. What happened to Chris will happen to Stewie. The genius is temporary. The time machine, the interdimensional devices, the weapons, the accent, the persona, all of it, has an expiration date. Stewie tries to prevent it. He attempts to rearrange his own DNA to lock in his intelligence permanently. The experiment goes wrong. He reverts to an actual baby, losing his speech, his cognition, his identity. Brian has to scramble to undo the damage, eventually using time travel to stop Stewie from making the attempt in the first place. The takeaway is brutal. Stewie's genius cannot be preserved. The show has canonically established that he will become ordinary. The baby who created the universe, who built time machines, who dropped his accent in a therapist's office and chose to put it back on because being known was scarier than being alone. That baby is going to grow up and forget everything. Every invention, every adventure, every moment of connection with Brian, every piece of the persona he built to survive. All of it will dissolve into the ordinary fog of an ordinary adolescence in an ordinary town, and Stewie won't even remember who he used to be. And this connects to one final theory that reframes the entire show. The Stewie perception theory, originally proposed by a Reddit user called iFornication, argues that the events of Family Guy are not objective reality. They are the world as perceived by Stewie's infant mind. Everything we see on screen is filtered through the consciousness of a baby who is trying to make sense of a world he doesn't fully understand. Brian can talk because, to Stewie, the family dog is just another family member. Of course he speaks. Everyone in the family speaks. The cutaway gags are the scattered associative thinking of an infant mind that can't hold a linear narrative. The exaggerated violence is how a baby interprets adult conflicts. The absurd celebrity appearances are how a child processes the sounds and images coming from the television in the living room. Peter's stupidity is how Stewie sees his father. Lois's cruelty is how Stewie experiences his mother's authority. If the theory is true, then nothing we've been watching for 25 years is real. It's all Stewie's perception. It's all the dream of a baby lying in a crib, watching the ceiling, listening to the noise of a household he can't control and doesn't understand, constructing an elaborate fantasy in which he is the smartest person in the room, and the dog is his best friend, and his mother is a villain, and his father is a clown, and the world outside is full of impossible things that a baby brain invents to fill the gaps in its understanding. And the cruelest part of the theory is the same as the cruelest part of the canon. Stewie will lose this. When puberty comes, when the genius fades, the fantasy will collapse. The world won't be interesting anymore. Brian won't talk anymore. The adventures will stop. And Stewie will become just another teenager in Quahog, Rhode Island, with no memory of the universe he created, or the persona he built, or the therapist he let die, or the version of himself that was once, briefly, the most extraordinary mind on the planet. Stewie Griffin is a tragedy disguised as a comedy. He is a child who built himself a character to survive in, who used intelligence as armor and cruelty as camouflage, who chose the mask over the face every single time he was given the chance to be real. And the show has told us directly, canonically, on the record, that the mask has an expiration date, that the genius will fade, that the accent will go silent, and that the real Stewie, the scared kid from Rhode Island with the ordinary voice and the desperate need to be known, will inherit a life he no longer has the tools to understand. That's Stewie Griffin, the smartest person in Quahog, the creator of the universe, a baby who will forget everything. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the talking dog, and the question that Family Guy has been refusing to answer for over 2 decades. Why can Brian Griffin talk? This sounds like a joke question. It sounds like the kind of thing a person asks about a cartoon and immediately gets told to stop overthinking it. He's a talking dog. It's an animated show. Dogs talk in cartoons. Move on. But Family Guy is not a show that exists in a vacuum. Family Guy exists in a shared universe with American Dad and The Cleveland Show. This has been confirmed through crossover episodes, shared references, and direct character interactions across all three series. What happens in one show has canonical implications for the others, and in American Dad, there is a talking goldfish named Klaus who lives with the Smith family. Klaus is not just a smart fish. Klaus is a German Olympic ski jumper whose brain was surgically implanted into the body of a goldfish by the Central Intelligence Agency. That's not a fan theory. That is the established canonical backstory of Klaus in American Dad. The CIA, within the shared universe of Seth MacFarlane's animated shows, has the technology and the inclination to take human brains and put them inside animal bodies. They have done it. They did it to Klaus. It is a verified fact within this fictional world. And that leads to a theory that originated from a writer at What Culture and has been picked up and expanded across Reddit and multiple theory compilation sites. The theory is straightforward. Brian Griffin is another CIA experiment. His intelligence, his ability to speak, his human personality, his capacity for complex emotion and abstract thought, none of it is natural. Brian is an ordinary dog who had a human brain implanted by the CIA at some point before the show began. The evidence is circumstantial, but within the logic of this universe, it tracks. Brian behaves more like a human than a dog in virtually every way. He drives a car, he writes novels, he votes in elections, he drinks martinis at a bar, he dates human women, sleeps with human women, and has romantic feelings for human women. He has a therapist, he has political opinions, he has a failed literary career, and the associated ego damage that comes with it. None of this is dog behaviour. All of it is human behaviour transplanted into a canine body. And here's the detail that makes the theory click. Brian is the only animal in Quahog who behaves this way consistently. Other dogs in the show are regular dogs. They bark, they chase squirrels, they don't order drinks at the Drunken Clam. Even when other talking animals appear in the show, they tend to be one-off gags rather than sustained characters. Brian's intelligence isn't a feature of the Family Guy universe generally. It's specific to Brian. Something happened to this particular dog that didn't happen to the others. If this CIA brain swap theory is true, it raises an immediate question. Whose brain is inside Brian? The show has never answered this directly, but the theory community has assembled a profile from Brian's behaviour patterns. Whoever the original human was, they were likely an intellectual, a writer, a liberal with strong political convictions and a weakness for alcohol. Someone whose personality traits would manifest in exactly the way Brian's personality manifests. And if the CIA did this to Brian for the same kinds of reasons they did it to Klaus, namely as an experiment in consciousness transfer and biological adaptation, then Brian's entire life in Quahog is an experiment that nobody, including Brian himself, is fully aware of. There's a competing theory, and it's just as interesting. A Reddit user named Ra Oalfi proposed that Brian isn't just a character in Family Guy. Brian is the author of Family Guy. The theory argues that the events of the show are being written by Brian, which is why he appears in virtually every episode, including episodes where his presence isn't logically necessary. Brian is the consistent point-of-view character. He's present in storylines that don't require him. He goes on adventures that the rest of the family doesn't. The Road to Episodes, which are the show's most beloved recurring format, all feature Brian as a co-lead, alongside Stewie. And critically, Brian is almost always portrayed as the voice of reason. He's the one who points out when Peter is being an idiot. He's the one who objects to the family's worst impulses. He's the one who delivers the moral of the story when there is one. In a show full of awful people doing awful things, Brian is consistently positioned as the character with the most insight, the most self-awareness, the most perspective, unless he's writing himself that way. The Brian as author theory suggests that Brian, as a failed novelist who has always dreamed of writing something important, is constructing the narrative of Family Guy as his magnum opus. He writes himself as the smartest person in the room because that's how writers see themselves. He writes Peter as a buffoon because that's how Brian sees his owner. He writes Stewie as a genius because Stewie is the only character Brian respects. And he writes the cutaway gags because Brian, like many failed literary writers, can't resist the temptation to show off his knowledge of pop culture and history at the expense of narrative focus. It's a fifth wall theory. It suggests that the unreliable narrator of the show isn't the show itself, but a character within the show who is controlling what we see. And if you accept the premise, it explains a lot. It explains why Brian is present in virtually every episode. It explains why Brian's flaws are always framed as sympathetic rather than truly damning. It explains why the one time the show killed Brian, in Life of Brian Season 12 Episode 6, the backlash was so severe that the writers reversed it 2 episodes later using Stewie's time machine. Brian can't die because Brian is the one telling the story. Kill the author and the story ends. Speaking of which, Brian's death and resurrection is one of the most significant moments in Family Guy's history, and the fan reaction to it reveals something important about what this character means to the audience. On November 24th, 2013, the episode Life of Brian aired. In it, Stewie and Brian are playing street hockey outside the Griffin house. A car comes around the corner and hits Brian. He's rushed to the veterinarian. The family gathers around his bed. Brian, barely conscious, tells them he loves them. And then he dies. The episode was not played for laughs. There was no cutaway gag. There was no last-minute rescue. Brian Griffin was dead. The family held a funeral. Stewie, devastated, tried to rebuild his time machine to go back and save Brian, but he couldn't obtain the parts he needed. The show moved on. The Griffins adopted a new dog named Vinny, a fast-talking Italian mutt who integrated himself into the family with alarming speed. The internet lost its mind. Not in the way the internet usually loses its mind about television, with memes and arguments and hot takes. This was genuine anger. Fans organised petitions demanding Brian's return. Social media campaigns flooded Fox with complaints. The reaction went beyond normal fandom disappointment and into something that felt almost like grief. People were mourning a cartoon dog. 2 episodes later, in Christmas Guy, Season 12 Episode 8, Stewie finds a way to travel back in time and save Brian from the car. Brian lives. Vinny is erased from the timeline. Everything goes back to normal. But the 2 weeks between Brian's death and his revival revealed something about the show that the writers may not have intended to expose. The audience didn't care that Brian was a hypocrite. They didn't care that he was pretentious, or that he treated women badly, or that his novels were terrible, or that he once gave Chris and Stewie herpes. They cared that he was Brian, that he was the dog on the couch, that he was the one who sat with Stewie at night, that he was the emotional constant in a house full of chaos. Brian's value to the audience was never about his character being admirable. It was about his presence being necessary, and that connects to a third theory about Brian that is darker than the other two. A Reddit user named Grandmaster Sexay proposed that Brian's character arc across the entire series is a realistic, unflinching portrayal of alcoholism. Not a cartoon version of it, not a joke about it, a genuine season-by-season documentation of what alcohol does to a personality over time. In the early seasons, Brian's drinking is charming. He's witty, he's sophisticated, he orders martinis at the bar and holds them with the kind of casual elegance that makes alcohol look like an accessory to intelligence. He's a social drinker, he's functional, he's the best version of himself. And then, gradually, so gradually that you don't notice it happening unless you're looking for it, Brian gets worse. His writing stalls. His relationships fail. His political convictions curdle from genuine idealism into self-righteous posturing. He becomes the person at the party who corners you to talk about their screenplay. He becomes the guy who lectures you about organic food while his own life is falling apart. He becomes a hypocrite, not because the writers decided to make him one, but because that's what long-term functional alcoholism does. It erodes your self-awareness. It widens the gap between who you think you are and who you actually are. It turns your best qualities into their own parodies. The theory tracks Brian's behaviour season by season and maps it against the documented progression of alcohol use disorder. The early charm gives way to defensiveness. The defensiveness gives way to isolation. The isolation gives way to increasingly desperate attempts to prove that he's still the person he was when the drinking was just a personality trait instead of a defining feature. Brian doesn't get worse because the writers got lazy. Brian gets worse because Brian has a disease that the show has been depicting with uncomfortable accuracy for over 2 decades. And here's where all 3 theories converge. Whether Brian is a CIA experiment, the secret author of the show, or a portrait of alcoholism in real time, one thing remains constant. Brian Griffin is a dog pretending to be a human. He walks upright. He speaks English. He wears a collar but no clothes. He exists in the space between species, fully accepted by neither. The humans treat him as a peer until it's convenient to remind him that he's a pet. The other animals in Quahog don't recognize him as one of their own. Brian is a liminal creature, suspended between identities, and the comedy of his character comes from watching him try to maintain the fiction of his humanity in a world that periodically yanks the mask off. In one episode, Brian gets worms. He scoots across the carpet. His body betrays the persona. In another, he chases a ball against his will, his instincts overriding his carefully constructed dignity. In another, he's taken to the pound and treated like what he technically is, an animal, and the humiliation nearly breaks him. Brian's entire existence is a performance, just like Stewie's. The dog is performing humanness, the way the baby is performing Britishness, and both of them, deep down, know that the performance is the only thing standing between them and a reality they can't bear to face. Brian is a dog, Stewie is a baby, and both of them have spent 25 years pretending to be something else, because being what they actually are, in the world they actually live in, is too small, too helpless, too powerless to endure. The show pairs them together for a reason. The road to episodes work because Brian and Stewie are the same character, expressed through different species. They're both frauds, they're both brilliant, they're both desperately lonely, and they're both addicted to the versions of themselves that keep other people from seeing what's really there. Brian once died and came back. Stewie once dropped his accent and put it back on. Neither of them can stay vulnerable for more than an episode at a time. The masks always go back up. The performance always resumes. And the audience always lets them, because we'd rather watch the entertaining lie than sit with the uncomfortable truth. That's Brian Griffin, a talking dog with a martini glass and a typewriter and a disease that nobody will name. The smartest pet in Quahog, the worst novelist in Rhode Island, and the one character on the show who might be making the whole thing up as he goes. But before we leave Brian and Stewie behind and move on, there's one episode that demands its own space, because it is the single most honest piece of television that Family Guy has ever produced, and it proves that the show is capable of something its critics have always denied it could do: sustained, uninterrupted, genuine emotional sincerity. Season 8, Episode 17, Brian and Stewie, aired May 2nd, 2010. The episode takes place entirely inside a bank vault. Brian and Stewie are accidentally locked inside after hours. There is no way out until the bank opens the next morning. They are trapped together in a sealed room for the entire duration of the episode. There are no cutaway gags. There is no B-plot. There are no musical cues. The episode aired without commercial breaks, which Fox had never done for the show before. For 22 minutes, Family Guy abandons every single element that defines it as a show and replaces them with 2 characters sitting on a floor, talking, and what they talk about is devastating. Brian reveals that he keeps a gun in his safety deposit box, not for protection, for himself. Brian Griffin has been carrying a firearm in a bank vault because he has considered ending his own life, and the gun represents the option he he hasn't ruled out. He tells Stewie about it with a casualness that makes the revelation more disturbing, not less. He isn't performing despair, he isn't making a dramatic confession. He's mentioning something that has been part of his reality for a long time, something he's carried quietly, something he's never told anyone, because nobody in his life has ever created the conditions for that kind of honesty. Stewie doesn't react the way you'd expect. He doesn't panic, he doesn't lecture, he asks Brian why, and Brian's answer is simple and unbearable. He's alone. He doesn't see the point. His life hasn't turned out the way he imagined it would, and he doesn't know how to fix it, and he's tired. The episode doesn't resolve this. It doesn't give Brian a speech about how life is worth living. It doesn't cut to a therapist or a helpline number or a montage of happy memories. It just lets the admission sit in the room. Two characters in a sealed vault, one of whom has just told the other that he's thought about dying, and the other who doesn't have the right words to make it better. The silence is the most honest thing Family Guy has ever broadcast. The rest of the episode deals with the mundane physical realities of being trapped in a small room overnight. Stewie needs his diaper changed. Brian has to do it. The scene is uncomfortable and funny, and deeply human in a way that the show rarely allows itself to be. Two beings who depend on each other performing the unglamorous acts of care that real relationships require. Not the grand gestures, not the dramatic sacrifices, the small, embarrassing, essential acts of showing up for someone when showing up means dealing with the parts of them that aren't entertaining. By the end of the episode, Brian and Stewie have reached an understanding that neither of them articulates directly. They don't say, "I love you." They don't hug. They don't have a moment of dramatic emotional breakthrough. They just survive the night together. They endure the discomfort. They tolerate each other's weaknesses. And when the vault opens the next morning, they walk out together, slightly changed by what they shared, but unable to point to the exact moment the change happened. Brian and Stewie is the episode that proves Family Guy could be a different show, if it wanted to be. It proves that the characters have depth that the normal format suppresses. It proves that the cutaway gags and the shock humour and the cruelty are choices, not limitations. The show chooses to cut away. The show chooses to deflect. The show chooses to be funny instead of honest, because funny is safer and easier and more commercially viable. But for one episode, for 22 minutes in a bank vault, the show chose honesty instead, and the result was the best thing the show has ever made. And it never did it again. Not really. Send in Stewie, Please, the therapist episode we discussed earlier, came close, but even that episode ended with Stewie choosing the mask over the face. Brian and Stewie is the only episode where the show let two characters be completely vulnerable for the full running time without pulling back, without inserting a joke to relieve the tension, without giving the audience permission to stop feeling. The show has been running for 15 years since that episode aired. 15 years of cutaways, 15 years of deflection, 15 years of choosing the funny over the real, and the bank vault is still there. The gun is still in the safety deposit box, and the conversation Brian and Stewie had on that floor has never been referenced again. Because that's how Family Guy works. It gives you one night of honesty, and then it locks the vault and pretends the night never happened. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the character who might be the most important person in the Griffin household, and also the person the household treats like she doesn't exist. Meg Griffin, the eldest child, the only daughter, the family's designated punching bag, and the one person in the entire show who was told directly to her face that her suffering is necessary and chose to accept it. Let's establish the baseline, because if you've only watched the post-revival seasons of Family Guy, you might not realise that Meg wasn't always the character she is now. In seasons 1 through 3, Meg Griffin was an awkward teenage girl with normal teenage problems. She had crushes on boys who didn't notice her. She struggled with her self-image. She wanted to be popular, She wanted her parents to understand her. Lois worried about her. Peter, in his clumsy, stupid way, tried to help. The family wasn't perfect, but Meg was a member of it. She belonged. Then the show came back, and Meg became something else entirely. Post-cancellation, Meg is treated by her family with a cruelty that goes beyond comedy and enters territory that is genuinely hard to watch. Peter regularly forgets she's his daughter. He has physically attacked her for laughs. He has abandoned her in dangerous situations without a second thought. He has told her to her face that she's not worth his time, his attention, or his love. Lois, who was once Meg's protector, became her most sophisticated tormentor, dismissing her with a contempt that is calculated rather than careless. Even Chris, her own brother, treats her with open disdain. The show's aware of this. The writers are not accidentally making Meg a punching bag. They are doing it deliberately, methodically, and with increasing intensity as the seasons progress. And the critical question that fans have debated for years is whether this constitutes lazy writing, whether writers simply couldn't figure out how to make a teenage girl funny and defaulted to cruelty as a substitute for comedy, or whether it constitutes something more intentional. Something the show is trying to say about family dynamics, about scapegoating, about the role that certain family members are forced to play in order to keep the system functioning. The answer came in Season 10, Episode 2, Seahorse Seashell Party, and it came in a way that most fans weren't prepared for. The episode takes place during a hurricane. The Griffin family is trapped in the house together. Tensions are high, everyone is on edge, and Meg, who has spent years absorbing abuse in silence, finally explodes. She turns on her family and tells them exactly what they are. She tells Peter he is a terrible father. She tells Lois she is a terrible mother. She lists specific instances of their cruelty with the precision of someone who has been cataloguing every wound, filing them away, building a case that she never expected to present. She is calm. She is articulate. She is devastating. And for the first time in the show's history, the Griffin family has to sit there and listen to the truth about themselves from the person they've been hurting the most, and the family falls apart. Without Meg absorbing the abuse, the other family members turn on each other. Peter and Lois start fighting. Chris spirals. The household, which has been held together by the invisible labour of Meg's suffering, collapses the moment she stops volunteering for the role. The Griffins cannot function as a family without someone at the bottom of the hierarchy, and the moment Meg steps out of that position, the entire structure implodes. And then Meg does something that makes this episode one of the most quietly heartbreaking things the show has ever produced. She goes to Brian. She tells him the truth. She says she understands what happened. She understands that the family needs a punching bag. She understands that without someone absorbing the cruelty circulates freely and destroys everyone. She understands that her role in this family is to be the person who gets hurt, so that everyone else doesn't have to hurt each other. And she volunteers to go back. She takes it all back. She tells the family she was wrong. She apologizes. She lets them off the hook. She resubmits herself to the abuse, not because she believes she deserves it, but because she is calculated with a clarity that rivals Stewie's intelligence, that her suffering is the price of the family's survival. Meg isn't the victim of a dysfunctional family. Meg is the structural engineer of one. She absorbs the load so the building doesn't collapse. Brian, who is the only person Meg tells the truth to, looks at her with something like awe. He doesn't argue. He doesn't try to talk her out of it. He recognizes what she's doing. He sees the sacrifice for what it is. And then the episode ends, and the show goes right back to treating Meg like garbage, as if the confession never happened. But it did happen, and it changes the way you watch every subsequent episode, because once you know that Meg is choosing to be the punching bag, once you know that she sees the system clearly and has decided to maintain it at the cost of her own dignity, every joke at her expense stops being a joke about a pathetic girl nobody likes and starts being a demonstration of the price one person pays to hold a broken family together. There's another layer to Meg's story that most casual viewers don't know about. Meg's voice changed between seasons 1 and 2. In the first 7 to 9 episodes of the series, Meg was voiced by Lacey Chabert, who was also appearing on Party of Five and couldn't maintain the schedule. Starting approximately with the season 2 episode Darboom, Mila Kunis took over the role and has voiced Meg ever since. This is a production fact, not a conspiracy, but within the context of the two different universes theory we discussed earlier, it becomes an eerie detail. Meg literally became a different person between the original run and the continuation. Her voice changed, her personality changed, her relationship with her family changed. If you believe that pre-cancellation and post-cancellation Family Guy take place in different realities, then the Meg who is abused by her family isn't the same Meg who was loved by them. She looks the same, she has the same name, but she is a different version of the character inhabiting a darker universe, played by a different actor, living a different life. In Season 14, Episode 6, Peter's Sister, the show attempts to explain Peter's treatment of Meg by introducing his older sister, Karen. Karen is a bully. She physically and emotionally abuses Peter throughout their childhood. She looks like Meg. She behaves the way Peter behaves toward Meg. The episode's thesis is that Peter treats Meg badly because she reminds him of the person who treated him badly. He's displacing his trauma onto his daughter because she triggers the same psychological wound that his sister carved into him decades ago. Fans rejected this explanation almost unanimously. Not because it doesn't make psychological sense, it does. Displaced aggression from childhood trauma is a well-documented behavioural pattern, but because the show had spent so many seasons making Meg's abuse so extreme, so gratuitous, so creative in its cruelty that no single backstory could retroactively justify it. You can't spend 15 seasons having a father tell his daughter she's worthless and then offer a one-episode explanation and expect the audience to say, "Oh, well, that makes it okay then." The damage is too extensive. The pattern is too entrenched. The explanation comes too late. And this is where the darkest reading of Meg's character emerges. It's not a fan theory from Reddit. It's an observation that comes from watching the show carefully over 2.5 decades. Meg Griffin is what happens when a writer's room doesn't know what to do with a female teenage character. She started as a normal girl. They couldn't find the comedy in her normalcy. So they made her a target. And once the target was established, once the pattern was locked in, and the audience was trained to laugh at her pain, there was no going back. The cruelty became self-sustaining. It became what Meg was for. Every writer who joined the show inherited a character whose entire function was to be humiliated, and each new writer pushed the humiliation further because that was the established expectation. The writers weren't telling a story about a girl who sacrifices herself for her family. They were telling a story about a girl they couldn't figure out, so they turned her into a joke. And then, in Seahorse Seashell Party, one writer, maybe one writer who actually cared about the character, snuck in an episode where the joke was acknowledged as a tragedy, where Meg was given the dignity of understanding her own situation, where she was allowed for 22 minutes to be the smartest, most self-aware person in the room. And then the next episode aired and the joke started again. Meg Griffin has been 17 years old for over 20 years. She has endured more consistent mistreatment than any character in the history of animated television. She has been physically struck by her father, emotionally dismissed by her mother, socially shunned by her peers, and inappropriately targeted by her father's best friend. And in the one episode where she was allowed to speak, she didn't ask for the abuse to stop. She asked for the family to understand that she was choosing to carry it. That's either the most profound character moment in Family Guy history or the most cynical. It's either a show acknowledging the humanity of a character it has spent decades dehumanizing, or it's a show using one moment of faux depth to retroactively justify 2 decades of lazy cruelty? And the honest answer is that it might be both. Family Guy has always existed in the space between sincerity and cynicism, and Meg is the character who lives at the exact centre of that divide. She is the show's conscience and its biggest failure at the same time. Before we move on, there's one more thing about Meg that deserves attention. In Dial Meg for Murder, Season 10, Episode 8, Meg goes to prison. When she comes back, she's changed. She's hard. She's aggressive. She physically dominates the family. Peter is afraid of her. Lois is afraid of her. For one episode, the power dynamic flips completely. Meg becomes the abuser, and the family becomes the abused, and the family cannot handle it. They cannot function when the hierarchy is inverted. They are so dependent on Meg being at the bottom that the moment she rises, the whole system breaks. The episode is played for laughs, but the subtext is clear. The Griffin family needs Meg to be weak. Not because she is weak, but because her weakness is the foundation the rest of them stand on. Remove it and they collapse. Reverse it and they collapse. The only configuration that works is the one where Meg absorbs the damage, and everyone else pretends it isn't happening. Meg Griffin isn't the weakest member of the Griffin family. She is the strongest. She is the only one who understands the system well enough to maintain it deliberately. She is the only one who has been offered the chance to escape and chose to stay. She is the only one who carries the family's dysfunction on her shoulders and does it with open eyes, knowing exactly what it costs her, choosing to pay the price because the alternative, a world where the Griffins have to face each other without a buffer, is worse than anything they've ever done to her. That's the Meg Griffin theory. She's not a punching bag, she's a foundation. And the family's greatest fear isn't that Meg might leave, it's that Meg might one day decide she's done holding the weight. And on that day, every Griffin in that house will finally have to look at each other, and at themselves, and at the rubble of a family that was only ever standing because one person agreed to stand beneath it. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to two mysteries that have been hiding in plain sight since the very first season, and both of them are so fundamental to the show's reality that acknowledging them threatens to unravel everything around them. The first is economic, the second is linguistic, and both of them are questions that the show will never answer because answering them would require committing to a version of reality that Family Guy has spent 25 years refusing to commit to. The economic mystery is simple. How do the Griffins afford their life? Peter Griffin works at the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery. Before that, he worked at the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory until his boss, Mr. Weed, died by choking on a dinner roll and the factory was demolished. Between the toy factory closing and the brewery hiring him, Peter cycled through an absurd number of jobs, none of which he held for more than an episode. He has been, at various points, a fisherman, a Renaissance fair jouster, a death metal singer, a tobacco lobbyist, a TV network owner, a sheriff, a pirate, and a professional Peter Griffin impersonator. He has been fired more times than most people have been hired. And yet the Griffins own a multi-bedroom house at 31 Spooner Street in Quahog, Rhode Island. They have 3 children. Lois does not work full-time for most of the series. They own at least 1 car. They appear to have no debt that prevents them from functioning. Peter drinks at the Drunken Clam multiple nights a week. The family takes vacations. They eat regularly. They live by the standards of a single-income household in New England, a middle-class life that Peter's employment history could not possibly sustain. Rhode Island has one of the higher costs of living in the United States. A 3-bedroom house in a town like Quahog, which the show depicts as a modest suburban community with waterfront access, would carry a mortgage that a brewery worker's salary would struggle to cover, even if that worker showed up sober and on time, which Peter demonstrably does not. The show has addressed this obliquely. Carter Pewterschmidt, Lois's billionaire father, is occasionally depicted as financially supporting the family, though he does so with contempt. Lois herself comes from extreme wealth, and the implication across multiple episodes is that Carter's money whether through direct gifts or inherited assets, provides a safety net that allows the Griffins to survive Peter's professional incompetence. But the show never makes this explicit, because making it explicit would change the dynamic. Peter isn't a working-class hero if his wife's family is bankrolling his lifestyle. He's a kept man. And the show needs Peter to feel like an everyman, which means the money question has to stay unanswered. Under the fantasy theory, the economic impossibility is easy to explain. Peter's mind doesn't understand money. Most people's dreams don't include accurate household budgets. The fantasy provides a house because Peter needs a house. It provides beer because Peter needs beer. It provides stability because stability is the thing Peter lost when his real family died. The dream doesn't need to balance the books because dreams never do. The second mystery is one of the most debated questions in Family Guy's fan community. Who can actually understand Stewie? This sounds like a question with a simple answer, but it isn't. In the early seasons, the show was relatively consistent. Most adults could not understand Stewie. He would deliver elaborate monologues, and the family would stare blankly or respond to the emotional tone rather than the content. Brian was the exception. Brian understood Stewie completely, which is part of what made their relationship unique. The baby and the dog spoke the same language, while the rest of the family couldn't hear either of them clearly. But as the show progressed, the rules became inconsistent. Some episodes depict adults understanding Stewie perfectly. Others depict the same adults being unable to hear him at all. Chris sometimes understands him. Lois sometimes responds to specific things he's said. Peter occasionally reacts to Stewie's dialogue in ways that suggest comprehension. The show has never established a definitive rule for who can and who can't understand the baby, and the inconsistency has generated years of fan debate. Under the Stewie perception theory, the inconsistency makes sense. If the show is Stewie's perception of the world, then the rules about who understands him change based on Stewie's emotional state. When Stewie feels connected to someone, that person can hear him. When Stewie feels isolated, nobody can. The comprehension isn't a fixed property of the other characters. It's a variable property of Stewie's psychology. He lets people hear him when he wants to be heard. He becomes invisible when he wants to disappear. Brian always understands Stewie because Brian is the one relationship Stewie has never wanted to lose. The dog hears the baby because the baby needs to be heard by the dog. It's not about Brian's intelligence or Brian's species. It's about Stewie's need, and in a show that might be entirely the projection of an infant's mind. Need is the only law that matters. The show itself seems aware of the ambiguity. In the season 16 bottle episode, Send in Stewie, please, the therapist understands Stewie perfectly. There is no ambiguity in the conversation. They communicate as equals. And at the end of the episode, Stewie lets the therapist die. The one adult outside of Brian who heard Stewie clearly, who understood him fully, who saw through the accent and the persona and the genius to the scared child underneath. That adult is dead by the end of the episode. Stewie eliminated the only person who could verify that the baby can actually talk. Whether that's a coincidence or a pattern depends on which theory you subscribe to, but the result is the same. The mystery stays open, the rules stay broken, and Stewie remains the most articulate person in a room where nobody can consistently confirm that he's speaking at all. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the people who live next door, down the street, and around the corner from the Griffins. Because the Griffin family gets most of the attention when people talk about Family Guy, but the town of Quahog, Rhode Island, is full of characters whose stories, when you actually look at them closely, are so dark that they make Peter's buffoonery feel like comic relief from the real horror happening on the other side of the fence. Let's start with Glenn Quagmire, because Quagmire is the character that the show has been the most honest about and the most dishonest about at the same time. Seth MacFarlane, who voices Quagmire, has described the character publicly as an appalling human being who is still caught in the Rat Pack era. That description is accurate as far as it goes. Quagmire is a sexual predator. The show has depicted him committing virtually every category of sexual offence that exists, from stalking to harassment to assault to acts involving minors to necrophilia. These are not implications drawn from subtle clues. These are things the show has depicted on screen, usually played for laughs, usually accompanied by his catchphrase giggity, usually treated as a quirky personality trait rather than a pattern of criminal behaviour. And the show knows this is a problem. It knows it because the show has also given Quagmire some of the most emotionally raw storylines in the entire series. And the dissonance between Quagmire the predator and Quagmire the human being is one of the strangest and most uncomfortable things about Family Guy. In Season 10, Episode 3, Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q, Quagmire's sister Brenda visits Quahog with her boyfriend Jeff. Jeff is abusive, not subtly abusive, not ambiguously abusive. He hits Brenda, he screams at her, he controls her, he degrades her in front of her brother and his neighbours. The episode does not cut away from the abuse. It does not soften it with humour. It presents domestic violence in a way that is genuinely disturbing, and it forces Quagmire, the man who has committed sexual violence against women for 20+ seasons, to confront the reality of what violence against women actually looks like when it's happening to someone he loves. Quagmire holds an intervention for Brenda. He tells her the woman he grew up with is gone. He begs her to leave Jeff. Brenda refuses. She says Jeff is sweet. She blames herself for his anger. She reveals that she's pregnant and engaged, and Quagmire, Peter and Joe decide to kill Jeff. This is not a comedy decision. The three men discuss murder with genuine moral weight. Joe, who is a police officer, initially refuses. Peter, who is an idiot, doesn't fully grasp the consequences. Quagmire is resolute. He has calculated that Jeff will never stop hitting his sister, and that the legal system will never protect her. The only solution is permanent. They lure Jeff on a hunting trip. Jeff, who is paranoid and violent, figures out their plan and tries to kill Quagmire first. In the final confrontation, Quagmire runs Jeff over with a car and crushes him against a tree. Jeff is dead. Quagmire goes home and gives Brenda a forged note saying Jeff left her. She never finds out the truth. The episode was controversial for obvious reasons. Critics pointed out the hypocrisy of Quagmire, a character who has been depicted assaulting women for a decade, being presented as the hero of a domestic violence storyline. Caitlin Olsen from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia voiced Brenda and delivered a performance that was genuinely affecting, but the performance existed inside a framework that the show had already undermined through years of treating sexual violence as comedy fodder. And yet, the episode works, not because it resolves the hypocrisy, it doesn't, but because it shows you the gap between what Quagmire does to strangers and what Quagmire feels about people he loves. He is a monster and a brother. He is a predator and a protector. He is both of those things simultaneously. And the show, in this one episode, refuses to pick one and discard the other. Quagmire is the most hypocritical character in Quahog. He is also the most complicated. And the fact that the show created him as a joke and then accidentally gave him enough backstory to be genuinely tragic is one of the most interesting things about Family Guy's relationship with its own characters. There's a theory from Reddit proposed by a user named DarkRabbit713 that argues the entire town of Quahog is a community of traumatized people whose comedic quirks are actually symptoms of unresolved psychological damage. The theory examines each major character and maps their behaviour to specific trauma responses. Quagmire's sex addiction is a response to losing the two women he genuinely loved, Lois and Cheryl Teagues. The void they left gets filled with meaningless encounters that never satisfy him because they're substitutes for the real connections he can't have. Peter's stupidity is a response to a childhood defined by an abusive father, a mother who abandoned him, and a learning disability that nobody addressed. He acts like an idiot because being an idiot gets him attention. And attention from anyone, even negative attention, is better than the neglect that defined his early life. Joe Swanson's relentless optimism is a response to losing the use of his legs. He performs strength and positivity because admitting the depth of his loss would break him. His marriage is barely functional. His wife Bonnie has openly discussed leaving him. His disability has reduced him from a fully capable agent of justice to a man who sits in a wheelchair at a bar while his friends have adventures he can't physically join. Joe smiles through all of it because the alternative is despair. Cleveland Brown, before he left for his own show and came back, is a man whose wife was taken from him by his own neighbour. Loretta was sleeping with Quagmire. Cleveland knew. Cleveland didn't fight back. Cleveland's passivity in the face of betrayal isn't a personality trait. It's learned helplessness. He grew up in a world that punished him for asserting himself. And by the time his wife was sleeping with the man next door, Cleveland had been conditioned to accept loss without resistance. The Dark Rabbit 713 theory argues that Quahog isn't a comedy. It's a support group that nobody in the group realises they need. These men meet at the Drunken Clam every week and drink together and laugh together and insult each other and go home to lives that are quietly falling apart. They don't talk about what's actually wrong. They don't seek help. They don't change. They just keep showing up. Because showing up at the bar is easier than sitting alone in a house full of damage they can't name. Now let's talk about Carter Pewterschmidt, because Carter is the character who connects the economic infrastructure of Quahog to the personal dysfunction of the Griffin family. Carter is Lois's father. He is a billionaire industrialist who controls significant portions of Quahog's economy. He hates Peter. He has hated Peter since the day Peter married his daughter, and he has spent decades expressing that hatred through financial manipulation, social humiliation, and open contempt. Carter is the most powerful man in Quahog, and he uses that power to make sure Peter knows, at every possible opportunity, that Peter is beneath him. The parallels to Mr. Burns in The Simpsons are intentional. Both shows feature a billionaire whose wealth distorts the reality of an entire town. Both billionaires treat the main character with contempt. Both use their economic leverage to maintain control over a population that depends on them. The difference is that Burns controls Springfield through a nuclear power plant. Carter controls Quahog through old money, media influence, and the simple fact that his daughter married down, and he has never forgiven any of them for it. Under the Dark Rabbit 713 framework, Carter represents the systemic force that keeps Quahog's residents in their respective traps. Peter can't escape his stupidity because Carter's contempt reinforces it. Lois can't escape her family because Carter's money is the safety net she'll never admit she needs. Meg can't escape the abuse because the economic structure of the Griffin household depends on Peter's employment, which depends on Peter's compliance, which depends on Peter having an outlet for his frustration, which is Meg. Carter doesn't need to be a villain in the traditional sense. He doesn't need to block out the sun or build a doomsday device. He just needs to exist at the top of the food chain, looking down with the kind of casual disdain that only generational wealth can produce. And the entire social ecosystem of Quahog arranges itself around him. The rich stay rich. The poor stay poor. The broken stay broken. And the bar stays open because the broken need somewhere to go. There's one more character who deserves attention here, and he's the one that nobody talks about because talking about him means acknowledging something the show itself has barely acknowledged. Herbert, the old man who lives down the street from the Griffins, the man with the high-pitched voice, and the walker and the obsessive interest in Chris Griffin. Herbert is a paedophile. The show has never used that word, but the show has depicted Herbert's interest in Chris with a consistency and specificity that leaves no room for ambiguity. Herbert watches Chris from his window. He invites Chris over to his house with thinly veiled pretexts. He makes comments about Chris's physical appearance that are played for uncomfortable laughs. The show treats Herbert as a recurring joke, a quirky neighborhood character whose predatory behavior is funny because he's old and frail and harmless looking, except he's not harmless. Within the fiction of the show, Herbert is an adult man who has been targeting a minor for over 2 decades. And the show's treatment of Herbert as comedic rather than criminal says something about Quahog that aligns perfectly with the Dark Rabbit 713 theory. This is a town where serious harm is happening in plain sight, and nobody does anything about it because acknowledging the harm would mean acknowledging the dysfunction, and acknowledging the dysfunction would mean doing something about it, and doing something about it would mean changing, and Quahog does not change. Joe is a police officer. Joe lives in the same neighborhood as Herbert. Joe has seen Herbert's behavior. Joe has done nothing, because Joe, like everyone else in Quahog, has been trained to look the other way. Not because he's corrupt, not because he doesn't care, because the town's entire social contract is built on collective avoidance. You don't talk about Quagmire's sex crimes. You don't talk about Peter's abuse of Meg. You don't talk about Herbert's interest in Chris. You don't talk about any of it. You go to the bar, you have a beer, you go home, you wake up tomorrow and nothing has changed. That's Quahog, that's the agreement, and the show, to its credit and to its shame, has never broken that agreement either. Family Guy has run for over 400 episodes, and Herbert has never been arrested. Quagmire has never been convicted. Peter has never faced consequences for hitting his daughter. The system is self-sustaining. The comedy is the system's defense mechanism. As long as the audience is laughing, nobody has to confront what the laughter is covering up. Quahog. Rhode Island isn't a funny town. It's a town that has learned to make everything funny, because the alternative is facing the fact that a pedophile lives next door, and a predator lives across the street, and a man who hits his daughter lives in the house on the corner, and a crippled cop who could stop all of it sits in a wheelchair at a bar and drinks instead. That's the Dark Rabbit 713 theory. Family Guy isn't a comedy about a dysfunctional family. It's a horror story about a dysfunctional community, told through the structure of comedy because horror is the only genre that Quahog cannot afford. If the residents of Quahog ever stopped laughing, they'd have to start screaming. And once the screaming starts, it doesn't stop, because there's too much to scream about. There's one more thing about Quahog that needs to be said, and it involves a character whose story crossed the boundary between fiction and reality in a way that the show was never designed to handle. Mayor Adam West. Adam West, the real Adam West, was an American actor best known for playing Batman in the 1966 television series. He joined Family Guy as a voice actor in Season 2, playing a fictionalized version of himself as the eccentric, absurdist mayor of Quahog. The character bore almost no resemblance to the real man. Mayor Adam West on the show was delusional, obsessive, prone to non sequiturs, and governed Quahog with the chaotic incompetence of a man who had no business being in charge of anything. He was also, quietly, one of the most beloved characters on the show. West voiced the character for 15 seasons. He appeared in hundreds of episodes. He became as much a part of Quahog's identity as Peter or Stewie or Brian. The drunken clam had regulars. The school had a principal, and the town had a mayor who once married his own hand and campaigned against broccoli and treated every municipal decision as a personal vendetta against invisible enemies. Mayor West was comedy in its purest form, absurdity without malice, foolishness without cruelty, a character who existed to be ridiculous and somehow made the town warmer by being in it. On June 9th, 2017, Adam West died. He was 88 years old. He'd been battling leukemia, and his death created a problem that Family Guy had never faced before. A real person who voiced a main character had died, and the show had to decide what to do with the character he left behind. Most shows in this situation recast the role or write the character out quietly. Family Guy did neither. They retired Mayor Adam West permanently. The character died off screen. Quahog held an election for a new mayor, and the replacement, a character named Mayor Wild West, was voiced by Sam Elliott and introduced in season 19. The show didn't try to replace Adam West. It acknowledged that Adam West was irreplaceable and moved on with someone completely different. But here's what makes this significant within the theories we've been discussing. Mayor Adam West's death is one of the very few instances where something that happened in the real world permanently changed the fictional world of Quahog. Characters die on Family Guy all the time. They get killed in cutaway gags, they get murdered in special episodes, they get erased from the timeline through Stewie's time travel, but they almost always come back. Death on Family Guy is temporary. It's reversible. It's a plot device that gets deployed and then retracted when the story needs the character again. Adam West didn't come back. He couldn't come back, because the man who gave the character his voice was gone, and without that voice, the character ceased to exist. Family Guy, a show built on the principle that nothing is permanent, that everything resets, that consequences dissolve between episodes, was forced to accept a consequence it couldn't undo. A real death broke the rules of a fictional world. Under the fantasy theory, Adam West's permanent absence from the show represents a crack in Peter's delusion. If the fantasy is generated by Peter's mind, and the fantasy operates on the principle that death is temporary, then the permanent loss of Mayor West is the fantasy encountering something it can't overwrite. The real Adam West's death reached through the fiction and imposed a rule the fantasy had always rejected. People die. They don't come back. The voice is gone, and no amount of time travel or narrative trickery can bring it back. Peter's mind handled this by replacing West with a new character rather than resurrect the old one. The fantasy adapted. It bent around the loss. It filled the mayoral seat with someone else, because the alternative, an empty seat, would force Peter to confront the concept of permanent absence. And permanent absence is the one thing the fantasy was built to prevent. Adam West's death is the moment where Family Guy accidentally proved that its own rules don't hold. The show that treats death as a revolving door met a death that was a one-way exit, and the show's response, quiet retirement instead of dramatic resurrection, tells you more about the limits of Quahog's reality than any fan theory ever could. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the phenomenon that has made Family Guy almost as famous for its apparent psychic abilities as it is for its comedy. The predictions. The idea that a crude animated sitcom about a fat man in Rhode Island has been accurately forecasting real-world events for over 2 decades, and the truth behind this phenomenon, which is both less supernatural and more unsettling than any conspiracy theory could explain. Let's go through them, not the vague ones, not the ones that require 3 layers of interpretation to connect to reality. The specific, documented, verified instances where Family Guy depicted something on screen that later happened in the real world with enough precision to make you sit back and stare. Caitlyn Jenner. In the season 7 episode We Love You, Conrad, which aired in 2009, Brian and Stewie are on the set of the reality show The Hills. They see Brody Jenner. Stewie makes a remark expressing disbelief that Brody came out of Bruce Jenner, then corrects himself and refers to Bruce as a beautiful Dutch woman. Brian pushes back and says Bruce is a man. Stewie disagrees. The scene aired 6 years before Caitlyn Jenner publicly came out as a transgender woman in 2015, but it didn't stop there. In season 10, episode 1, Lottery Fever, which aired in 2011, the show depicted Bruce Jenner performing a flamboyant burlesque dance number for a military audience. The depiction was deliberately feminine, deliberately exaggerated, and deliberately suggestive of a gender identity that Jenner had not yet publicly disclosed. The show went back to the same well twice across 2 different seasons, both times depicting Jenna in a way that anticipated the eventual public transition by years. Was this a prediction, or was it an open secret? People who worked in entertainment had been aware of rumours about Jenna's gender identity for years before the public announcement. Seth MacFarlane moves in Hollywood circles. His writers have access to industry gossip. It's entirely possible that the Jenna jokes weren't predictions at all, but rather comedy writers referencing something they'd heard through the grapevine and turning it into a bit. The prediction isn't supernatural. The prediction is a comedy writer's room with better sources than most news outlets. Kevin Spacey. In Season 4, Episode 4, Don't Make Me Over, which aired in 2005, there is a cutaway gag in which Stewie is running naked through a mall, screaming about Kevin Spacey. The joke is brief, absurd, and seemingly random. 12 years later, in October 2017, actor Anthony Rapp publicly accused Kevin Spacey of making sexual advances toward him when Rapp was 14 years old. Multiple additional accusers came forward in the weeks that followed. Spacey's career collapsed. The show had made a joke connecting Spacey to inappropriate behaviour with what appeared to be a minor reference, 12 years before the accusations went public. Again, the question is whether this is prophecy or proximity. Rumours about Spacey's behaviour had circulated in Hollywood for decades before the public accusations. People in the entertainment industry talked about it. Writers' rooms, which tend to be populated by people who pay close attention to power dynamics and whisper networks, are exactly the kind of environment where these rumours get processed into comedy. The Spacey joke wasn't a prediction. It was a comedian saying out loud what a lot of people in the industry already knew but hadn't reported. Robin Williams. In Season 10, Episode 22, Viewer Male Number 2, which aired in 2012, one segment of the episode involves Peter being cursed so that everything he touches turns into Robin Williams. Robin Williams is everywhere. Every surface, every object, every person Peter contacts becomes another copy of the comedian. Peter initially enjoys it, but quickly becomes overwhelmed. The Williams presence becomes suffocating, inescapable, and Peter eventually attempts suicide to make it stop. On August 11th, 2014, Robin Williams died by suicide. The world mourned one of the most beloved performers in entertainment history, and in a coincidence so jarring it almost defies belief, BBC Three in the United Kingdom was actually airing that exact episode at the moment the news broke. Family Guy had aired an episode 2 years earlier that depicted Robin Williams in the context of a suicide plotline, and the broadcast was running as the real tragedy unfolded. The episode didn't predict Williams' death. It couldn't have. Williams was dealing with Lewy body dementia, a diagnosis that wasn't publicly known until after his death. The connection between the episode and the real event is pure coincidence, a show that mines celebrity culture for comedy, making a joke that, through tragic timing, landed in a way nobody intended. But the coincidence is haunting, and it's the kind of coincidence that makes people reach for explanations that are bigger than random chance, because random chance feels inadequate when the overlap is this precise. The Boston Marathon. This one is the most disturbing of all the Family Guy predictions, and it's the one that Fox took so seriously they pulled the episode from streaming platforms. On March 17th, 2013, Family Guy aired an episode in which a cutaway gag shows Peter Griffin winning the Boston Marathon by driving his car through the course and taking out several runners. In the same episode, Peter befriends a member of a terrorist organisation, and in the following episode, he accidentally triggers 2 separate explosions. The marathon gag and the explosion plot were separate scenes across connected episodes. Exactly 1 month later, on April 15th, 2013, 2 homemade pressure cooker bombs detonated near the finish line of the actual Boston Marathon, killing 3 people and injuring over 260 others. A clip was edited together combining the car through the marathon scene with the explosion scene, making it appear as though the show had depicted a bombing at the Boston Marathon. The edited clip went viral. Fox immediately removed the episode from its Hulu library. The connection between the episodes and the bombing is entirely manufactured by the edited clip. The show did not depict a bombing at the marathon. It depicted a driving gag and an explosion scene that an internet user spliced together from separate moments to create a false narrative. But the timing, an episode featuring the Boston Marathon and explosions airing less than 30 days before an actual bombing at the actual Boston Marathon, is the kind of coincidence that conspiracy theorists live for. It's the kind of coincidence that makes people believe the show is broadcasting information about future events. Because the alternative, that it's just random, that a show set in New England made a joke about New England's most famous athletic event a month before that event became the site of a terrorist attack, feels like too much of a stretch in the other direction. Justice Antonin Scalia. In the season 5 episode Meet the Quagmires, which aired in 2007, Peter travels back in time with the help of Death, the recurring character who serves as Quahog's personification of mortality. During the time travel sequence, Death mentions that Dick Cheney, the then Vice President of the United States, has shot several people, including Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. The joke references the real 2006 incident where Cheney accidentally shot Harry Whittington during a quail hunting trip. 9 years later, in February 2016, Antonin Scalia died in his sleep at a ranch in Texas. He had been on a hunting trip the day before. The cause of death was determined to be natural, likely heart-related. But the show had specifically named Scalia, specifically connected his death to Dick Cheney, and specifically placed the event in the context of a hunting trip, 9 years before Scalia died after a hunting trip. The cause didn't match. Cheney didn't shoot him, but the combination of the correct person, the hunting context, and the eventual death produced an overlap that was specific enough to make even skeptics pause. The Ellen DeGeneres controversy. In a cutaway gag that aired years before the workplace misconduct allegations against Ellen DeGeneres became public, Family Guy depicted Ellen as a talk show host who aggressively talked over her guests, made them uncomfortable, and created an atmosphere that was less friendly than it appeared on the surface. The depiction was brief and played as a throwaway joke. Then in 2020, multiple former employees of the Ellen DeGeneres show came forward with allegations of a toxic workplace culture, including intimidation, racism, and fear-based management. DeGeneres' public persona as the nicest person in entertainment was shattered, and the Family Guy cutaway, which had seemed like a random jab at a beloved celebrity, suddenly looked like a warning. Bitcoin. In a gag where Peter offhandedly mentions investing in Bitcoin as a way to solve the family's financial problems, the show referenced the cryptocurrency before its mainstream explosion. Fans noted that Bitcoin's value surged significantly in the period following the episode's air date, though drawing a causal connection between a cartoon joke and global cryptocurrency markets is the kind of reasoning that only the internet could produce with a straight face. Now here's the thing about all of these predictions. Every single one of them has a rational explanation. The Jenner jokes were industry gossip. The Spacey joke was a Whisper Network reference. The Williams episode was tragic timing. The Boston Marathon clip was manufactured. The Scalia connection requires ignoring the actual cause of death. The Ellen joke was an observation that plenty of people in Hollywood had already made privately. And the Bitcoin reference is the kind of vague financial joke that would eventually appear correct by default because Bitcoin did, in fact, go up. The rational explanations are satisfying. They make sense. They deflate the conspiracy, but they also don't fully account for the sheer volume of coincidences. Because Family Guy has been accumulating these apparent predictions at a rate that goes beyond what you'd expect from a show that's simply well connected to Hollywood gossip. There are too many of them. They're too specific. They span too many categories, from celebrity secrets, to political deaths, to terrorist attacks, to cultural shifts. And this is where the meta theory comes in. The one that's more interesting than psychic writers or time-traveling showrunners. Family Guy doesn't predict the future. Family Guy documents the present with such exhaustive, obsessive, comprehensive detail that when the present eventually becomes the future, the documentation looks like prophecy. Family Guy has produced over 400 episodes. Each episode contains dozens of jokes, most of them referencing specific people, specific events, specific cultural trends, and specific power dynamics in American society. The show's writers are not amateurs. They are educated, well-connected observers of culture who spend their professional lives studying celebrities, politicians, corporations, and institutions, looking for the absurd angle, the hidden hypocrisy, the thing that everyone knows but nobody says. When you produce that much observational comedy over that long a period, covering that many topics with that much specificity, some of your observations are going to line up with future events. Not because you predicted them, because you described the conditions that made them inevitable. You pointed at a building and said it looked unstable, and then 5 years later, it fell down, and everyone gasped and said you predicted it, but you didn't predict anything. You just looked at the building more carefully than everyone else. The Jenner transition wasn't a prediction. It was an observation that something was happening that the public couldn't see yet, but the industry could. The Spacey accusation wasn't a prediction. It was a joke about a widely known secret. The Ellen revelation wasn't a prediction. It was a characterization that turned out to be accurate because the writers were paying attention to signals that the general audience wasn't. Family Guy's writers are not psychic. They're just observant. They watch the same world we all watch, but they watch it with the eyes of people whose job is to find the joke, and the joke is almost always the same. The truth that everyone can see but nobody will say out loud. The emperor has no clothes. The celebrity is hiding something. The politician is lying. The institution is failing. The culture is shifting in a direction that hasn't been named yet. Comedy writers are professional truth tellers. They look at reality, strip it down to its most uncomfortable elements, exaggerate those elements until they're funny, and then broadcast them to millions of people who laugh because the exaggeration contains a kernel of recognition. We laugh because we already knew. We just didn't say it. And when reality eventually catches up to the joke, when the celebrity falls, when the politician dies, when the institution collapses, when the cultural shift that was already happening finally becomes visible, it looks like the show predicted it. But the show didn't predict anything. The show said what was already true. The world just took a few years to admit it. That's the predictions theory. Family Guy isn't a crystal ball. It's a mirror. It reflects American culture with such high resolution that when the culture eventually does what the culture was always going to do, the reflection looks prophetic. But it's not prophecy. It's just accuracy. And in a world where most people aren't paying close enough attention to see what's coming, accuracy looks like magic. The show has also made thousands of jokes that didn't come true, thousands of predictions that failed, thousands of observations that turned out to be wrong. Nobody screenshots those. Nobody posts them on social media. Nobody builds conspiracy theories around the predictions that missed. Because that's how confirmation bias works. You remember the hits and forget the misses. And when a show produces 400 plus episodes of densely packed pop culture commentary, the hit rate is going to look impressive, even if it's statistically ordinary. But try telling that to the internet the next time a Family Guy clip from 2007 lines up perfectly with a headline from 2026. Because the truth is, even knowing how the trick works, it's still impressive to watch. 400 episodes, 25 years, thousands of satirical observations about the trajectory of American culture, and enough direct hits to make even the show's own creators wonder if maybe, just maybe, they know something they shouldn't. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to two competing theories that each propose a different, catastrophic origin point for the version of Family Guy we've been watching. The first argues that the apocalypse already happened. The second argues that the Griffins are already dead. The Darboom theory centers on a single episode, Season 2, Episode 3, Darboom. The episode aired on December 26, 1999, 1 week before the real Y2K date, and it depicts the Griffin family surviving a nuclear holocaust triggered by the Millennium Bug. The world ends, civilization collapses, Stewie mutates into a tentacle creature from the radiation. The Griffins wander through an irradiated wasteland, eventually founding a new community called New Quahog. The episode ends with a reveal that suggests the entire thing was a dream. Specifically, it's framed as the dream of Pam Ewing from Dallas, the classic television trope of erasing an entire season's worth of events, by revealing they were imagined. The show treats the ending as a joke, a wink, a reminder that nothing in Family Guy has to be taken seriously. But fans noticed something. The episodes that follow Darboom don't feel like the episodes that came before it. The world of post-Darboom Family Guy is subtly different. The humour is darker. The reality is more elastic. The characters begin behaving in ways that deviate from their established patterns. And the theory argues that the Pam Ewing ending was the fiction. The nuclear holocaust was the reality. Everything after Darboom takes place in the irradiated ruins of the original world, and the characters' increasingly bizarre behaviour across later seasons is the result of radiation exposure, environmental contamination, and the psychological toll of living in a post-apocalyptic landscape that has been cosmetically rebuilt to resemble the world that was destroyed. The theory is a long shot. Even its proponents acknowledge that it requires ignoring the explicit framing of the episode's ending, but it connects to the larger pattern we've been discussing throughout this video, which is the idea that something happened to the show at a specific point in its run that changed the reality the characters inhabit. Whether that point was the cancellation, or the Y2K episode, or the moment Homer's vending machine fell in The Simpsons equivalent, the structural argument is the same. The show broke at a specific moment, and everything after that moment is a different version of reality. The purgatory theory goes even further. It proposes that the Griffins are dead. All of them. The entire family died at some point before the events of the show, and Quahog is their afterlife. Not heaven, not hell, something in between. A holding pattern where the dead exist in a state of permanent repetition, reliving the same domestic conflicts, the same neighbourhood dynamics, the same bar conversations, forever. Without resolution, without growth, without the possibility of moving on. The evidence for this theory is mostly atmospheric. Quahog has a character named Death who walks the streets like a regular citizen. The town experiences catastrophic events that would destroy any real community, and then resets as if nothing happened. The characters cannot age. The characters cannot permanently die. The consequences of their actions evaporate between episodes. The entire structure of the show mirrors what religious traditions describe as purgatory, a place where souls are stuck, repeating the patterns of their earthly lives, waiting for something that never comes. Under this theory, the cutaway gags aren't avoidance. They're fragments of the characters' former lives, memories from before death that surface randomly and without context. The way a drowning person's life supposedly flashes before their eyes. Every cutaway is a memory. Every random celebrity reference is something one of the Griffins saw on television while they were still alive. Every historical parody is a half-remembered fact from a textbook or a documentary, resurfacing in the minds of people who no longer have the context to organise their own memories. The purgatory theory has never gained the traction of the Peter fantasy theory or the Stewie perception theory, but it addresses something the others don't. It explains the show's complete indifference to its own continuity. In purgatory, continuity doesn't exist because time doesn't exist. Events don't build on each other because there's no forward motion. The same things happen over and over because the dead don't create new experiences. They just recycle old ones in increasingly distorted forms. Whether you read Quahog as a fantasy, a baby's perception, a parallel universe, a post-nuclear wasteland, or the afterlife, the conclusion is the same. The characters are stuck. The world is broken, and nobody's coming to fix it. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the darkest fan theory in the history of Family Guy. The one that reframes every episode, every character, every joke, and every cutaway gag into something that isn't comedy at all. The Peter Griffin fantasy theory. And if the coma theory is the darkest reading of The Simpsons, this is its equivalent for Family Guy. Except it might be worse. The theory was documented by CBR in October of 2020, based on a Reddit post that laid out a scenario so thoroughly constructed and so internally consistent that it's impossible to read and then watch the show the same way again. Here's what the theory proposes. Everything we have ever seen on Family Guy is happening inside the mind of Peter Griffin. Not the Peter Griffin on the show, the real Peter Griffin. The one lying in a bed in a psychiatric facility somewhere in Rhode Island, lost inside a fantasy he constructed to survive the worst thing a human being can experience. In the real world, according to this theory, Peter Griffin's life looks nothing like the show. His children are different. Meg in reality is beautiful. She's the most popular girl at her high school. She's confident, she's social, she's everything the Meg on the show is not. Chris, in reality, has an intellectual disability. He didn't get enough oxygen when he was born, and it affected his cognitive development. He's not the bumbling teenage boy we see on the show. He's a young man with genuine limitations who needs genuine care. And here's where the theory turns. Meg, who in the real world is a kind and caring older sister, feels a connection with Chris precisely because of his vulnerability. She looks out for him. She takes him places. She includes him in her social life, because that's the kind of person the real Meg actually is. One night, Meg takes Chris to a party. She drinks too much. Chris has a panic attack. The party's overwhelming for him, and he needs to leave. Meg, who's been drinking, makes the decision to drive them home. She shouldn't be behind the wheel. She knows it. But Chris needs her and there's nobody else. There's an accident. Both Meg and Chris are killed. Lois, Peter's wife, cannot survive the loss of 2 children. The grief is total and absolute, and it breaks something inside her that cannot be repaired. While pregnant with what would have been their 3rd child, Lois takes her own life. Peter loses everything. His daughter, his son, his wife, his unborn child. Every person in the world who loved him and depended on him and made his life worth living, gone in the space of days. The grief doesn't just break Peter, it annihilates him. He doesn't just go through a bad period, he shatters. His mind, unable to process a loss this complete, does the only thing it can do to protect itself. It builds a new world, a world where his children are alive, where his wife is alive, where nobody can die permanently, where the worst things that happen can always be undone by the next episode, where reality is flexible enough that no tragedy is ever final. That world is Family Guy. Everything on the show, every episode since the very first one, is a fantasy being generated by the broken mind of a man who lost his entire family and retreated into a version of reality where he gets to keep them. Every joke is his attempt to find humour in a universe that should be defined by horror. Every cutaway gag is his mind jumping away from the present moment, because the present moment is a hospital room where he's alone and his family's gone. Every impossible event, every cartoon physics, every reset at the end of every episode is Peter's brain refusing to let the story end in tragedy, because the real story already ended that way and he cannot survive it again. The theory explains Peter's stupidity. In the real world, according to this reading, Peter isn't dumb. He's an ordinary man of ordinary intelligence who failed at the one job that mattered most, keeping his family safe. He couldn't protect his children. He couldn't save his wife. He couldn't prevent any of it. And the guilt of that failure is so massive, so all-consuming, that in the fantasy, Peter makes himself an idiot. Because if he's stupid, truly stupid, incapable of understanding the consequences of his actions, then he can't be held responsible for what happened. His fantasy version of himself is too dumb to have prevented the accident. Too dumb to have noticed that Meg was drinking. Too dumb to have stopped Lois from falling into despair. Peter's stupidity in the show isn't a character trait, it's a defense mechanism. It's a man who blames himself for everything, choosing to build a version of himself that can't be blamed for anything. The theory explains Brian. In the real world, Peter's intelligence didn't disappear. He didn't actually become stupid. He just couldn't bear to be smart anymore, because being smart meant understanding what he'd lost. So he split himself. The dumb parts became Peter Griffin, the cartoon character. The smart parts became Brian Griffin, the family dog. Brian is Peter's intelligence, externalized and transplanted into an animal body so that Peter can have the benefit of his own insight without having to claim ownership of it. Brian is the voice in Peter's head that knows the truth. Brian is the part of Peter that remembers what happened, that understands the real world, that tries to make sense of the fantasy, even though making sense of it would mean acknowledging that it's a fantasy. Brian is a dog because Peter needs distance from his own intelligence. If Brian were a human character, Peter would have to acknowledge that the smart observations Brian makes are actually his own thoughts. By making Brian a dog, Peter creates plausible deniability. The smart things Brian says are just a dog talking. They're not Peter's thoughts. They're not Peter's insights. They're just the ramblings of a household pet who happens to be unusually articulate. The theory explains Joe Swanson. In the real world, Joe is a friend of Peter's, but Peter doesn't know Joe personally. Joe is described to Peter by Cleveland and Quagmire during their visits to the psychiatric facility. They tell Peter about this neighbour he never met, a man who is strong, heroic, physically capable, and deeply devoted to his family. Everything Peter wasn't. Everything Peter wishes he had been. And Peter takes this description and drops it into his fantasy, creating the version of Joe we see on the show, a man who represents the father and husband Peter believes he failed to be. Joe is paraplegic in the fantasy because Peter needs to limit Joe's perfection. A fully able-bodied version of the man Peter wishes he were would be too painful to exist alongside the version of Peter who couldn't save his own family. So Peter puts Joe in a wheelchair. He makes him physically limited. He lets Joe be heroic and devoted and brave, but only from a seated position. It's Peter's compromise with his own envy. The theory explains Cleveland Brown's departure and return. Cleveland had a spin-off series, The Cleveland Show, which ran from 2009 to 2013. In the fantasy theory, this corresponds to a period in the real world where Cleveland, who along with Quagmire visits Peter in the facility, started to lose his grip on reality. Cleveland had been indulging Peter's fantasy for years, visiting regularly, playing along, telling Peter stories that Peter could incorporate into his dream world. But the sustained contact with a man living inside a delusion started to take a toll. Cleveland needed a break. He needed to step away. He needed to return to his own life and his own reality before Peter's fantasy consumed him. So Cleveland stopped visiting, and in the fantasy, Cleveland left Quahog. He moved to another town. He got his own show. He was still alive, still existing, still part of Peter's universe, but he was somewhere else. Because in the real world, Cleveland was somewhere else. He was home, protecting his own sanity. When Cleveland eventually started visiting again, after taking the time he needed, Cleveland returned to Quahog in the fantasy. The Cleveland show was cancelled. Cleveland moved back. The timeline of the real-world visits maps to the timeline of the fictional departures and returns. The theory explains the cutaway gags. This is perhaps its most elegant insight. Family Guy's signature comedic device is the cutaway, a non-sequitur flashback, or fantasy triggered by a line of dialogue. A character says something, and the show cuts to a brief, unrelated scene that illustrates the reference, usually with exaggerated or absurd consequences. Cutaways are what make Family Guy feel like Family Guy. They're the show's DNA. Under the fantasy theory, cutaways are dissociative episodes. They are Peter's mind jumping away from the present moment because the present moment is threatening to become too real, too painful, too close to the truth of his situation. Every time a conversation in the fantasy approaches something that might force Peter to confront his loss, his brain fires a cutaway. It throws up a random, distracting, unrelated image or scenario, and by the time the cutaway ends, the dangerous moment has passed. The conversation has moved on. The threat has been neutralized. This is exactly how dissociation works in real trauma patients. The mind, when confronted with stimuli that echo the original traumatic event, detaches. It goes somewhere else. It produces intrusive thoughts, random memories, bizarre associations, anything to pull the conscious mind away from the trigger. Family Guy's cutaway gags aren't a comedy device. They're a clinical symptom. They're the show's version of a dissociative response, and they happen with the frequency and randomness that you would expect from a mind that is constantly, perpetually, desperately avoiding the one thought it cannot afford to have. The thought is simple. They're dead. Meg is dead. Chris is dead. Lois is dead. Stewie was never born. Brian is a part of myself I can't face, and I'm alone in a room that doesn't have a TV or a couch or a family sitting on it, and I will be alone in this room for the rest of my life, unless I keep the fantasy running, unless I keep the story going, unless I never let the episode end. The theory explains why nobody ages. Just like the coma theory in The Simpsons, the fantasy theory answers the floating timeline problem with devastating simplicity. Meg doesn't age because Peter last saw her as a teenager. Chris doesn't age because Peter's memory of Chris is frozen at the age Chris was when he died. Stewie doesn't age because Stewie was never born. Stewie exists in the fantasy as the child Lois was pregnant with when she died, the child Peter never got to meet, imagined into existence by a father who needed to believe his family was complete. Stewie's genius, his inventions, his impossible capabilities, all of it is Peter's hope for what this child might have been. Stewie is the potential that was destroyed before it could be realised, brought to life in the fantasy as the most extraordinary member of the family, because Peter needs to believe that what he lost was extraordinary. If Stewie were ordinary, the loss would feel ordinary, and Peter cannot afford for the loss to feel ordinary. He needs it to feel cosmic. He needs to believe that the universe took something irreplaceable from him. So in the fantasy, the universe gave it back in the form of a baby who can build time machines and travel between dimensions and create the universe itself. And here's the part that stays with you. If the fantasy theory is true, then every episode of Family Guy that has ever aired is Peter Griffin's love letter to his dead family. Every joke is an attempt to make them laugh. Every adventure is an attempt to give them the lives they never got to live. Every reset, every return to normal, every time the credits roll and the Griffins are sitting on the couch together, watching television, it's a father holding his family in the only way he still can, in his mind, in a dream that never ends because ending the dream means admitting they're gone. Peter Griffin sits in a psychiatric facility. His family is dead. His mind has built a world where they're alive. And every Sunday night at 9 o'clock, millions of people tune in to watch a man's delusion broadcast as entertainment without ever realising that the man behind the jokes is screaming into the void and the void is laughing back. The show will never confirm this theory. It can't. Confirming it would end the show. because the moment the fantasy is acknowledged as a fantasy, it loses its power to protect Peter from reality. And protecting Peter from reality is the only thing keeping the story going. Without the delusion, there is no show. Without the show, there is no family. Without the family, there is only a man in a room, alone, remembering a car accident and a funeral and a wife who couldn't live without her children and a child who was never born. The Peter Griffin fantasy theory is the darkest reading of Family Guy that exists. It takes every element of the show, its comedy, its cruelty, its impossibility, its refusal to let consequences stick, and reframes it as the coping mechanism of a grieving father. It turns the cutaway gags into dissociative episodes. It turns the floating timeline into frozen grief. It turns Stewie into a ghost. It turns Brian into a mirror. And it turns Peter, the dumbest man in Quahog, into the saddest man in Rhode Island. And the worst part is, it makes sense. Every piece of evidence in the show supports it. The show doesn't have to confirm it because the show is the confirmation. Every episode is proof. Every joke is evidence. Every impossible thing that happens and gets forgotten by the next week is a man's mind refusing to let the dream collapse. That's the Peter Griffin fantasy theory. And if it's true, then Family Guy isn't a comedy about a dysfunctional family. It's a tragedy about a man who lost everything and built a world out of the rubble. A world where his daughter is alive, even if she has to be unloved. A world where his son is alive, even if he has to be stupid. A world where his wife is alive, even if she has to be frustrated. A world where his unborn child is a genius, even if that genius has to fade. A world where his dog can talk, because if the dog can talk, then Peter isn't alone. And Peter cannot, under any circumstances, be alone. Because being alone means the fantasy is over, and the fantasy is the only thing standing between Peter Griffin and a truth that would kill him faster than any cutaway gag ever could. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the structural mysteries of Family Guy, the ones that aren't about any single character or storyline, but about the fabric of the show itself, the rules that govern Quahog, the contradictions that have accumulated over 25 years, and the increasingly strange evidence that Family Guy might not be what it appears to be, even within its own universe. Let's start with the floating timeline, because it's the foundational weirdness that everything else rests on. Family Guy uses a floating timeline, meaning the characters exist in a perpetual present. The year is always the current year. The technology is always current technology. The pop culture references are always contemporary. But the characters don't age. Stewie is still 1, Chris is still 14, Meg is still 17, although she turned 18 in one episode, and the show pretended it didn't happen. Peter and Lois are still in their early to mid-40s. Nobody gets older, nobody moves forward, nobody reaches the next stage of their life. This is standard practice for long-running animated shows. The Simpsons does it, South Park does it, Bob's Burgers does it. It's a convention of the medium. The audience accepts it because the alternative, characters aging in real time across decades of episodes, would fundamentally change what the show is. Bart Simpson can't go to college. Stewie Griffin can't go through puberty. The moment you let time pass, the show you built ceases to exist and becomes something different. But Family Guy has been running long enough that the floating timeline has started producing contradictions so massive they can't be ignored. Peter and Lois's backstory has been rewritten at least 3 times. When the show began, their courtship was set in the late 1970s and early 1980s. They met at a dance. They fell in love. The cultural references were era appropriate, but as the floating timeline dragged the present forward year by year, the backstory had to move with it. If Peter and Lois are in their 40s in 2025, they didn't meet in 1980. They met around 2000, which means their high school experience wasn't defined by disco and Watergate. It was defined by boy bands and dial-up internet. The show has depicted this shift across multiple flashback episodes, each one placing Peter and Lois's origin story in a different decade, each one retconning the previous version without acknowledgement. Their memories are unstable. Their history is a rough draft that gets revised every few years to maintain the illusion of a permanent present. And within the logic of the floating timeline, this is normal. Characters don't have fixed pasts. They have whatever backstory is needed to make the current episode work. When the next episode needs a different backstory, the old one gets discarded. Under the Peter Griffin fantasy theory, the floating timeline makes perfect sense. Peter's children are frozen at the ages they were when they died. His wife is frozen at the age she was when he last saw her. Time doesn't pass in the fantasy because time stopped for Peter on the day of the accident. His mind can't move forward because moving forward means moving away from the last moment he had his family. The floating timeline isn't a convention. It's a symptom of arrested grief. Under the Stewie perception theory, the floating timeline also makes sense. A baby doesn't understand the passage of time. To a 1-year-old, yesterday and a year ago are the same thing. The reason nobody ages in the show is because the consciousness perceiving the show doesn't have a concept of aging. Stewie sees the world in an eternal present because that's how infants experience reality. The floating timeline is the temporal framework of an infant's mind projected onto an entire universe. Under the two different universes theory, the floating timeline is a feature of the post-cancellation universe. Specifically, in the original universe, time did pass. The show ran for 3 seasons in something resembling real time. When the show was cancelled and rebooted in a parallel universe, the new universe came with different rules. Time doesn't advance, characters don't grow. The rules of this reality are fundamentally different from the one the original Griffins inhabited. The floating timeline isn't a production choice, it's a property of the specific universe we've been watching since 2005. Now let's talk about the show within a show, because this is where Family Guy does something that no other animated sitcom has ever done with the same level of commitment. Family Guy regularly suggests that it is a fictional television show being produced within its own universe, and the evidence for this is scattered across multiple seasons and multiple series in the MacFarlane Extended Universe. The clearest example is Season 15, Episode 4, Inside Family Guy. This episode is structured as a behind-the-scenes mockumentary about the production of Family Guy. It shows the actors who play the Griffins arriving at the studio, dealing with production issues, interacting with crew members. The conceit of the episode is that the characters we watch every week are played by performers who go home to different lives when the cameras stop rolling. Peter Griffin isn't Peter Griffin. He's an actor playing Peter Griffin on a television show called Family Guy. This is more than a fourth wall break. This is a fifth wall break. The show is telling you that everything you've been watching is a performance within a fiction within a fiction. And it's not the only time this has happened. In American Dad, which exists in the same canonical universe as Family Guy, there is a scene where Stan Smith lists his favourite fictional dogs. One of the dogs he names is Brian Griffin. Stan specifically identifies Brian as fictional. In another American Dad episode, Steve Smith is seen watching Family Guy on television. In yet another, the American Dad characters cut filming to celebrate their 1000th vagina joke, revealing a production set and crew behind the scenes of their own show. These references create a layered metafictional structure that has never been fully resolved. If Brian is fictional within American Dad, and American Dad exists in the same universe as Family Guy, then Family Guy is a television show within its own shared universe. The Griffins are characters being played by actors, or generated by writers, or broadcast by a network that exists within the world that Seth MacFarlane's shows collectively inhabit. This creates a paradox. If Family Guy is fictional within its own universe, then who is making it? Who are the writers? Who is the audience? And if the events of Family Guy are a produced television show, then the events we watch aren't really happening to the Griffins. Their storylines being performed for an audience that exists within the fiction. Some fans have tried to resolve this by arguing that American Dad is the real show and Family Guy is a fictional show that exists within the American Dad universe. Others argue the reverse, that Family Guy is real and American Dad is a show within the Family Guy universe. Others argue that both shows are fictional within each other, creating an infinite recursive loop where each show exists as a television program in the other show's reality. None of these solutions are satisfying because none of them are meant to be. The metafictional references in both shows are deliberate disruptions, moments where the shows acknowledge their own artificiality and then immediately move on, as if the acknowledgement didn't happen. They're winks, not explanations. They're the shows saying, we know this isn't real, without ever committing to what real means within their own frameworks. But under the Peter Griffin fantasy theory, the show within a show concept takes on a much darker dimension. If everything in Family Guy is Peter's fantasy, then the Inside Family Guy episode, the one where the characters are revealed to be actors on a set, is Peter's subconscious trying to tell him the truth. His mind is producing an episode where the characters acknowledge that they're fictional, that none of this is real, that there are people behind the scenes creating the illusion. It's the fantasy trying to wake Peter up. It's the delusion producing a crack in its own surface, a moment where the constructed reality briefly reveals the mechanism that sustains it. And Peter, in the fantasy, watches the episode and laughs and moves on, because that's what the fantasy is designed to do. It absorbs threats to its own coherence. It acknowledges the possibility that it's not real, processes that possibility as a comedy bit, and then seals the crack before Peter can look through it. Inside Family Guy isn't a metafictional experiment. It's an immune response. It's the fantasy defending itself against the one thing that could destroy it, which is the awareness that it's a fantasy. Now let's talk about several smaller mysteries that have been quietly accumulating in the background of Family Guy for decades, because these are the ones that don't get their own Wikipedia articles but deserve attention. The giant chicken. Peter Griffin has an ongoing feud with Ernie the giant chicken that has produced some of the most elaborate fight sequences in animated television history. These fights destroy buildings, they level city blocks, they span multiple locations and last for minutes at a time, and they are never explained. Why is Peter fighting a giant chicken? The original justification, a bad coupon, is so trivial that it functions as an anti-explanation. The fights are completely disconnected from the reality of the show. They exist in their own pocket dimension of escalating violence, immune to the normal rules of Quahog, exempt from the normal consequences of destruction. Peter and the chicken destroy half the city, and by the next scene everything is rebuilt and nobody mentions it. Under the fantasy theory, the chicken fights are Peter's rage externalized. The chicken isn't a real antagonist, it's a symbol. It's the formless, inexplicable anger that lives inside a man who lost everything and has nowhere to put his fury. He can't be angry at the car that killed his children, because cars are everywhere, and being angry at all of them would drive him insane. He can't be angry at Meg because Meg is dead, and being angry at a dead child is too horrible to contemplate. He can't be angry at himself because being angry at himself is exactly what drove him into the fantasy in the first place. So he invents a chicken, a giant, inexplicable chicken that he can fight and fight and fight, destroying everything around him, expending the violence that has no legitimate target, and then walking away as if nothing happened. The chicken fights aren't comedy. They're catharsis. They're Peter's subconscious providing a safety valve for an emotion that has no healthy outlet. The death character. Death appears as a recurring character in Family Guy, personified as a hooded skeletal figure who is socially awkward, romantically unsuccessful, and surprisingly sympathetic. Death is not frightening in this show. Death is pathetic. Death is lonely. Death is a guy who shows up to do a job nobody wants him to do, and then goes home to an empty apartment and watches television alone. In a show that the fantasy theory proposes is being generated by a man whose wife, children, and unborn baby are all dead, the characterization of death as a bumbling, sympathetic figure is remarkable. Peter's fantasy doesn't make death terrifying, it makes death relatable. It softens the concept. It takes the thing that destroyed Peter's world and turns it into a guy you'd feel sorry for at a party. Because if death is just a sad dude with a scythe, then death isn't a cosmic horror. Death is just a thing that happens. And if death is just a thing that happens, then what happened to Peter's family isn't a targeted act of cruelty from the universe. It's just bad luck. And bad luck is easier to live with than cosmic cruelty. Peter's treatment of Meg in the fantasy. We discussed this in the Meg segment, but under the fantasy theory, it takes on another layer. In the real world, Meg was beautiful. She was popular. She was loved. In Peter's fantasy, Meg is ugly, hated and abused. Why would a father who loved his daughter construct a fantasy where she's tormented? The answer, according to the theory, is guilt. Peter loved the real Meg. He loved her completely. And the real Meg is dead because she drove drunk trying to protect Chris. And Peter wasn't there to stop it. In the fantasy, Peter punishes the fantasy version of Meg because he can't punish the real one. He can't hold the real Meg accountable for the decision that killed her and killed Chris because she's dead, and accountability is meaningless. So he transfers the punishment to the fantasy. He makes the fake Meg suffer because the real Meg can't. He makes the fake Meg ugly because the real Meg's beauty, the real Meg's popularity, the real Meg's social life, those are the things that led her to the party where she drank too much. Peter associates Meg's beauty with the party. He associates the party with the accident. And in the fantasy, he removes Meg's beauty because beauty, in Peter's damaged psychology, is the thing that killed his daughter. It's a monstrous logic. It's an irrational, grief-warped, psychologically shattered logic, but it's internally consistent, and it explains the single weirdest aspect of the show, which is why a father would be so relentlessly cruel to his own child, with a precision that no other interpretation has ever matched. The Conway Twitty gags. Multiple times throughout the series, Family Guy has cut to a full, unedited performance of country singer Conway Twitty. These segments last for minutes. They're not abridged, they're not interrupted. The show simply stops being Family Guy and becomes a Conway Twitty concert film for what feels like an eternity. The audience sits there confused, waiting for the joke to end, except the joke is that it doesn't end. The show just plays Conway Twitty until the running time is filled and then resumes as if nothing happened. Under the fantasy theory, the Conway Twitty segments are system crashes. They're moments where Peter's fantasy runs out of material. His mind has been generating content non-stop since the break, producing characters and scenarios and jokes and adventures at a pace that no human brain could sustain indefinitely. And sometimes the engine stalls. Sometimes the fantasy can't produce another scene, or another joke, or another cutaway. And when that happens, the system defaults to the last thing it can retrieve from memory. A Conway Twitty song playing on a television in a psychiatric facility common room. The sound of a country singer that Peter's mind grabs onto and broadcasts in a loop until the system can reboot and resume generating the fantasy. Conway Twitty isn't a gag, it's a loading screen. It's the sound of a man's mind buffering while it tries to produce another 22 minutes of a reality that doesn't exist. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. There are a few more mysteries hiding in the margins of Family Guy that deserve attention before we bring everything together. They're smaller than the theories we've been discussing, but they add texture to the picture. And some of them are darker than they appear. The first is Bertram, Stewie's half-brother, and possibly the most important character that the show introduced and then quietly erased from existence. Bertram is the product of Peter Griffin's donated genetic material. At some point before the events of the show, Peter donated significant quantities of his DNA, presumably sperm, for money. One of the resulting children was Bertram, a baby who shares Stewie's intelligence, shares Stewie's ambition, and shares Stewie's capacity for violence, but possesses none of Stewie's redeeming qualities. Bertram is what Stewie would be without Brian. Without the one relationship that teaches Stewie empathy, Bertram is pure aggression, pure intellect, pure will to power, with no emotional counterweight. Bertram and Stewie clash repeatedly across the series. Their conflict reaches its peak in The Big Bang Theory, the Season 9 episode we discussed earlier, where Bertram travels back in time to prevent Stewie from ever being born. Bertram's plan is elegant. He and Stewie share DNA through Peter. If Bertram eliminates Stewie's ancestors far enough back in the timeline, Stewie ceases to exist without affecting Bertram's own lineage. Stewie and Brian pursue Bertram to Renaissance-era Italy, where they discover that Leonardo da Vinci is one of Stewie's direct ancestors. Bertram attempts to kill da Vinci. Stewie intervenes, and in the struggle Stewie is forced to kill Bertram, his own half-brother, a child who shares his father's DNA, a mirror image of himself, distorted by the absence of love. Under the fantasy theory, Bertram represents something chilling. If Peter's fantasy generated Stewie as the idealized version of his unborn child, then Bertram is the nightmare version. The child that Peter fears his genes might have produced. The dark potential. The intelligence without the warmth. The ambition without the conscience. Bertram is Peter's subconscious acknowledging that the same DNA that could produce a genius could also produce a monster, and the only difference between the two is who raised them. The second mystery is related. Peter has an unknown number of biological children scattered across the country. The show has referenced this multiple times, establishing that Peter donated his genetic material extensively, and that the resulting offspring number in the dozens, possibly more. In one episode, a crowd of Peter's biological children track him down. They all look like him. They all share his traits. And Peter, characteristically, is unable to process the implications. The darkest reading of this detail connects to the generational damage theory we discussed. Peter's DNA is loose in the world. His genetic material has produced children he'll never meet, never raise, never influence. Some of those children might be brilliant, some might be damaged, some might be Bertram's. And Peter, the man who can't even raise the children he lives with, has scattered his biological legacy across a population that will never know who their father is. The Griffin gene pool isn't contained within 31 Spooner Street. It's everywhere. And the show which has made this canonical has never reckoned with what that means. The third mystery is Ernie the Giant Chicken. We discussed the chicken fights earlier as an expression of Peter's externalized rage, but the show recently confirmed something that fans had been speculating about for years. After 23 seasons of escalating violence between Peter and the chicken, the show's executive producers confirmed that Ernie the Giant Chicken is dead. The feud is over. The fights are done. For a recurring gag that spanned the entire run of the show, the chicken's death carries surprising weight. The chicken fights were one of Family Guy's most recognizable elements. They were spectacles of destruction that had no narrative purpose and no connection to whatever story the episode was supposedly telling. They existed purely as eruptions of inexplicable violence between a man and a bird, and audiences loved them precisely because they defied explanation. If the chicken represented Peter's rage, then the chicken's death means the rage has finally been exhausted. Peter has fought the formless anger that lived inside him for 23 seasons, and the anger is gone, not resolved, not understood, not processed through therapy or self-reflection or any of the healthy mechanisms that a real person might use, just gone. Beaten out of existence through repetition. Peter punched the chicken until the chicken stopped getting up. Whether that's catharsis or just exhaustion depends on which version of Peter you believe in. The cartoon Peter has lost a recurring gag. The fantasy Peter has run out of violence, and the audience has lost one of the last pieces of original Family Guy that connected the current show to the version that premiered after the Super Bowl in 1999. There are two Griffins we haven't given their own segments, and both of them deserve a moment before we bring everything together. Lois and Chris, the mother and the son, the two characters that the show uses the most and examines the least. Lois Pewterschmidt. Griffin is the daughter of a billionaire. She married a man her father despises. She raised 3 children in a house that runs on chaos. She has been married to Peter for the entire duration of the show, and in that time she has watched him destroy property, assault strangers, endanger their children, humiliate her in public, forget her birthday, forget her existence, lose dozens of jobs, break the law, start cults, fight a chicken through skyscrapers, and require her to clean up the aftermath of every single catastrophe he generates, and she stays. The show presents Lois's patience as her defining trait. She is the responsible one. She is the voice of reason. She is the person who looks at the wreckage of whatever Peter did this week and sighs and starts sweeping. But the show has also given us glimpses of who Lois is when the patience runs out. And the person underneath is nothing like the calm, suburban mother the show usually presents. Lois was wild before Peter. The show has established that she was promiscuous, reckless, and drawn to danger. She made adult films. She had relationships her father tried to bury. She was a woman with appetites and ambitions that had nothing to do with running a household in Quahog. And then she married Peter, and the wildness was compressed into the role of wife and mother. And the compression has been building pressure for 25 years. When Lois snaps, she's terrifying. Not in the way Peter is terrifying, which is blunt and stupid and destructive without intention. Lois snaps with precision. She is surgical when she's angry. She knows exactly where the wounds are, because she's the one who's been dressing them. The show treats her occasional eruptions as comedy beats, brief outbursts that resolve by the end of the episode, but the pattern underneath is something closer to a pressure cooker that releases steam just often enough to avoid an explosion but never actually cools down. Under the trauma theory, Lois is the most repressed character on the show. She has sublimated every part of herself that doesn't serve the family. Her intelligence, her ambition, her sexuality, her capacity for anger, all of it has been folded into the role of Peter's wife and the children's mother. She is performing domesticity the way Stewie performs Britishness and Brian performs humanness. The mask is different, but the function is the same. Lois is hiding who she really is because who she really is would destroy the structure that everyone else depends on. Under the fantasy theory, Lois is the character Peter needs the most and understands the least. His fantasy version of his dead wife is patient because that's what Peter needs from her. She forgives because that's what Peter needs her to do. But the fantasy occasionally breaks down because Peter, somewhere in his subconscious, knows that the real Lois was more complicated than the version he's generated. The wild Lois, the angry Lois, the Lois who made choices that the fantasy can't account for. She leaks through. She erupts. She does things that the patient wife archetype wouldn't do, and then the fantasy patches the hole, and Lois goes back to the kitchen, and the episode ends, and the pressure starts building again. And then there's Chris, the forgotten Griffin, the middle child who the show has consistently treated as the least interesting member of the family. Chris is 14. He has been 14 for over 2 decades. He is overweight, dim, sexually confused, and largely ignored by his parents, who are too busy dealing with Peter's disasters, Meg's suffering, and Stewie's genius to pay attention to the ordinary teenager who doesn't generate drama or build time machines or absorb the family's cruelty. Chris just exists. He goes to school, he comes home, he watches television, he occasionally says something stupid, and the show moves on. But here's the thing about Chris that the show has revealed in pieces without ever assembling the full picture. Chris is an artist. he draws. He has genuine creative talent that the show has acknowledged in multiple episodes and then immediately discarded because Chris's talent doesn't fit the role the show has assigned him. His role is to be dumb. His role is to be Peter's son in the most literal sense, a younger copy of the same deficiencies. His talent threatens that role because talent implies depth, and depth implies a character worth exploring. And exploring Chris would mean taking time away from the characters the show cares about more. Chris is also the one Griffin who has consistently been the target of a predator. Herbert's obsession with Chris has been a running gag for the entire series, and the show has never reckoned with what that means for Chris as a person. A child has been stalked by an adult neighbour for 25 years. The child's parents are aware of the neighbour's existence. The child's father is friends with a police officer who lives next door, and nobody has protected Chris. Nobody has intervened. Nobody has even had a serious conversation with Chris about the old man down the street who watches him from the window. Under every theory, Chris's invisibility is the most damning indictment of the Griffin family. Meg's abuse is visible. It's acknowledged within the show. The family knows they're hurting Meg, even if they won't stop. But Chris's neglect is invisible. Nobody in the family has noticed that their son is being ignored, and nobody has noticed that their son is in danger. Chris is the blind spot. He is the member of the family that the family has collectively agreed to overlook, not out of malice, but out of the simple, devastating fact that there's only so much attention to go around, and Chris doesn't demand any. In a family of loudmouths, geniuses, victims, and alcoholics, the quiet kid with the sketchbook disappears. And the show, which is a reflection of the family, disappears him too. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the final mystery, the one that sits at the centre of everything we've discussed for the past 3 hours, like a black hole, warping every theory, every character, every joke, and every impossible event around it. This is where we tie it all together. Every thread, every contradiction, every buried storyline, an unresolved question, and dark reading of a show that has been running for over 25 years, without ever once stopping to explain itself. We've spent 3 hours in Quahog. We've watched a show die twice and come back different. We've traced Seth MacFarlane's footsteps to an airport gate that closed 10 minutes before a plane hit the North Tower. We've listened to Stewie Griffin drop his accent in a therapist's office and then let the therapist die rather than be known. We've watched Brian Griffin pretend to be human while his liver slowly fails. We've seen Meg absorb the cruelty of an entire family and volunteer to keep absorbing it because the alternative is worse. We've mapped the trauma of an entire neighbourhood through the lens of a Reddit theory that turns a comedy into a horror story. We've counted the predictions that came true and explained why they came true without magic. And we've stared into the darkest reading of the show that exists, the one where Peter Griffin is lying in a psychiatric facility dreaming about a family that's already dead. Every theory in this video is different. Every theory uses different evidence, different assumptions, different entry points into the question of what Family Guy actually is. But every theory arrives at the same place. Something is wrong in Quahog. Something fundamental. Something that goes deeper than the animation style or the cutaway gags or the crude humour that the show hides behind like a drunk hiding behind a lamppost. Whether it's parallel universes or infant perception or collective trauma or the fantasy of a grieving father or some combination of all of these things, at once, something has broken the rules of reality in this town. And the show has been telling us about it since the very first episode. Not through dramatic reveals, not through exposition or monologues or after-school special earnestness, through accumulation, through repetition, through the slow, patient layering of detail upon detail upon detail until the picture becomes undeniable if you're willing to look at it. Let's start with the thing that connects every theory. The characters don't change. They cannot change. The show will not allow them to change. Peter Griffin has been the same person for 25 years. He's stupid, he's impulsive, he's selfish, he hurts the people he loves and doesn't understand why they're hurt. He learns a lesson at the end of an episode and forgets it by the beginning of the next one. He is locked in a behavioural loop, so tight that every season is functionally identical to the one before it. The settings change, the guest stars change, the cultural references update. But Peter Griffin, at the end of season 24, is the same Peter Griffin who walked through the door of 31 Spooner Street in 1999. He hasn't grown, he hasn't matured, he hasn't gained an ounce of self-awareness or empathy or restraint. He is frozen. Lois Griffin has been patient for 25 years, patient with Peter's stupidity, patient with the chaos he generates, patient with a marriage that would have destroyed any real person decades ago. She occasionally snaps. She occasionally reveals that she's more complicated than the patient wife archetype the show assigns her. But by the next episode, she's back to baseline, standing in the kitchen, tolerating Peter, maintaining the house, managing the dysfunction. She cannot escape the role the show has written for her any more than Peter can escape his. Meg cannot stop being the punching bag. Chris cannot stop being the dim sidekick. Stewie cannot stop being the genius baby. Brian cannot stop being the pretentious dog. Every character in Family Guy is trapped inside a definition that was written for them in 1999 and has not been meaningfully updated since. The show can add layers. It can give Stewie a therapy episode. It can let Meg have a monologue. It can kill Brian and bring him back. But it cannot let any of these characters actually change. Because actually changing would mean the show has to change. And the show cannot change because the show is a machine that runs on the exact configuration of characters it already has. This is true of most long-running animated shows. The Simpsons has the same problem. South Park has it to a lesser degree. Archer has it. Bob's Burgers has it. It's a structural limitation of the episodic animated format. Characters reset because the format demands it. The status quo is God. But Family Guy is different from those shows in one critical way. Family Guy knows it. Family Guy is aware of its own prison in a way that most animated shows aren't. The show has produced episodes that directly acknowledge the characters' inability to change. It has produced episodes where the characters try to change and fail. It has produced episodes where the characters discover that they're fictional and that their lives are being controlled by writers who will never let them escape the loop. Inside Family Guy showed the characters as actors on a set. Back to the Pilot showed the characters visiting an earlier version of their own reality and being unable to reconcile who they were with who they've become. The Simpsons Guy, the crossover episode in season 13, showed the Griffins travelling to Springfield and meeting their counterparts, seeing another family trapped in the same loop, and then fighting them because when two groups of trapped people meet, the only thing they can do is project their frustration onto each other. The show isn't just stuck, the show knows it's stuck, and it processes that knowledge the same way it processes everything else. Through humour, through deflection, through a cutaway gag that acknowledges the problem and then dissolves it into a punchline before anyone has to take it seriously. But here's the question nobody asks. If the characters can't change, and the show knows the characters can't change, and the show has explicitly depicted the characters discovering that they can't change, then what is Family Guy actually about? What is the point of a show that openly acknowledges its own stasis? What are we watching week after week, year after year, if we already know that nothing will be different at the end? The answer depends on which theory you believe. If you believe the parallel universe theory, we're watching a darker version of a family that once existed in a better reality. The characters can't change because they're not the original characters. They're copies living in a corrupted version of the world the originals inhabited. The loop isn't a production convention. It's a feature of the universe they're trapped in. Somewhere, in another dimension, the original Griffins are living lives that progress, that evolve, that move forward in time. We just can't see them anymore. We're watching the wrong family in the wrong universe, and the show will never let us switch back. If you believe the Stewie perception theory, we're watching a baby's interpretation of a world he can't control. The characters don't change because Stewie can't imagine them changing. He's an infant. His parents are fixed constants in his mind. They don't have inner lives. They don't grow or evolve or surprise him. They are what they are. They do what they do. The loop is a product of a 1-year-old's limited capacity for imagining other people as complex, dynamic beings. To Stewie, Peter will always be the dumb father. Lois will always be the controlling mother. Meg will always be invisible. The world is what Stewie sees, and what Stewie sees is a series of fixed archetypes performing the same roles over and over, because a baby's brain can't generate anything more nuanced than that. If you believe the trauma theory from Dark Rabbit 713, we're watching a community of damaged people who have collectively agreed to stop growing. Change requires confrontation. Confrontation requires admitting that something is wrong, and Quahog has a social contract that forbids admitting anything is wrong. The characters can't change because changing would mean acknowledging the trauma, and acknowledging the trauma would mean doing something about it, and doing something about it would mean the whole fragile structure of avoidance and denial that keeps Quahog functioning would collapse. The loop is maintained by consensus. The characters stay the same because they've agreed to stay the same. The way real people in real dysfunctional communities agree to stay the same because the cost of change is higher than the cost of repetition. And if you believe the Peter Griffin fantasy theory, the characters don't change because they exist inside the mind of a man who can't let them change. Peter's children are frozen because his memory of them is frozen. His wife is frozen because his last image of her is frozen. His friends are frozen because his understanding of them stopped updating on the day his world ended. The loop is grief. The loop is a father replaying the same day, the same dynamics, the same family configuration over and over and over, because every repetition is a refusal to accept that the real version of these people is gone. The characters don't change because they're not real. They're memories, and memories don't grow. Memories just repeat. Every theory arrives at the same conclusion through a different door. The characters are trapped. The loop is real, and the show is aware of it. Now let's talk about what makes Family Guy's version of this prison unique among animated shows. Because The Simpsons has the same problem, and South Park has the same problem, and a dozen other shows have the same problem. But Family Guy does something with its stasis that none of those other shows do. Family Guy makes the stasis cruel. The Simpsons traps its characters in a loop that is fundamentally kind. Homer is dumb but lovable. Marge is patient and loved. The kids have their quirks, but they're part of a family that, beneath the dysfunction, genuinely cares about each other. Springfield is a town that might be mutated and amnesiac and economically captive, but it's also a town where people know their neighbours and show up for each other and maintain something recognisable as community. The Simpsons loop is a warm bath. It's comfortable. It's the television equivalent of coming home. Family Guy's loop is not comfortable. Family Guy's loop is a trap where the characters are punished for existing. Peter is mocked for his stupidity. Meg is degraded for her appearance. Chris is ignored for his mediocrity. Brian is humiliated for his pretensions. Lois is trapped in a marriage that grinds her down episode by episode. Stewie is the most brilliant person in the room, and nobody listens to him because he's a baby, and nobody takes babies seriously. The show doesn't just freeze its characters, it tortures them in the freeze. It takes the worst version of each character's circumstances and loops it indefinitely with no possibility of resolution. Peter will always be dumb, and the world will always punish him for it. Meg will always be abused, and the family will always need her to be. Brian will always be a failure, who can't finish his novel, and can't maintain a relationship, and can't stop drinking. The loop isn't stasis, the loop is hell, and the show knows this. The show has made this explicit. In the season 16 finale, Peter falls into a coma and has a conversation with God. This is not the first time God has appeared on Family Guy. God is a recurring character, usually played for comedy, usually depicted as a petty, distracted, sometimes cruel deity who treats his creation the way a bored child treats an ant farm. But in this episode, Peter's conversation with God carries weight. Peter is in a coma. Peter is between life and death. And Peter talks to God about his life, about his family, about the meaning of everything that has happened to him. The show uses this as a season finale. It's one of the rare moments where Family Guy drops the comedy entirely and lets a character sit with the weight of their existence. Peter is talking to the being that created the universe. In a show where Stewie also created the universe, in a show that might be a fantasy inside Peter's own mind, and the recursive layers of authorship and creation pile up until the question of who is speaking to whom becomes genuinely philosophical. If Peter is talking to God, is God real within the fantasy? Is God a part of Peter's delusion? Is God the therapist that Peter's subconscious has conjured to process what happened to his family? Is God the show's writers reaching through the fiction to give their character a moment of rest? Is God the audience, the millions of people who tune in every week and keep the loop running by watching? The show doesn't answer these questions. It can't. Answering them would require committing to a reality, and Family Guy has survived for 25 years precisely by refusing to commit to anything. The show's greatest strength and its greatest curse is its total resistance to permanence. Nothing sticks, nothing lasts, nothing matters beyond the episode it happens in. And that resistance to permanence is what makes the show both endlessly rewatchable and profoundly hollow. But here's where the theories converge one final time, because the hollowness isn't a flaw. The hollowness is the point. Think about what a cutaway gag actually is. Not what it does comedically, what it does structurally. A cutaway gag is a moment where the show abandons its own narrative. A character says something, and instead of continuing the story, the show jumps to an unrelated scene, plays it for a few seconds, and then returns to the story as if the interruption didn't happen. The cutaway doesn't advance the plot. It doesn't develop the characters. It doesn't contribute to the episode's themes. It just exists, briefly, and then it's gone. Cutaways are the show's dominant creative device. They are what people think of when they think of Family Guy. They are the thing that distinguishes this show from every other animated sitcom, and they are, fundamentally, acts of avoidance. Every time the show's about to do something meaningful, a cutaway fires. Every time a conversation is about to get real, a cutaway fires. Every time a character is about to confront something true about themselves, or their relationships, or their circumstances, a cutaway fires. The show cannot sit with its own emotions for more than 30 seconds without escaping into a random, disconnected, disposable joke. Under the fantasy theory, cutaways are dissociative episodes. Under the Stewie perception theory, cutaways are an infant's scattered attention. Under the trauma theory, cutaways are collective avoidance. Under all of these frameworks, the cutaway gag is the same thing. It's a mechanism for not dealing with what's actually happening. It's a defense against depth. It's the show saying, I know this is painful, but look over here instead. Look at this random thing. Look at this celebrity reference. Look at this absurd scenario that has nothing to do with anything. And by the time it's over, the painful moment will have passed and we can go back to pretending everything is fine. Family Guy is a show that is structurally incapable of sincerity. The format won't allow it. Every time the show tries to be sincere, the cutaway impulse fights back. Every time a character tries to say something real, the machinery of the show intervenes and replaces the real thing with a joke. The show is addicted to its own avoidance in the same way Brian is addicted to alcohol. It can see the problem. It can occasionally acknowledge the problem, but it cannot stop. And maybe that's the deepest theory of all. Not that Family Guy is a dream or a fantasy or an infant's perception or a parallel universe. Maybe the deepest theory is the simplest one. Family Guy is a show about avoidance. It's a show about people who cannot face what's in front of them, created by people who built an entire comedic apparatus designed to ensure that nobody ever has to face what's in front of them. The cutaway gag isn't just a joke, it's the show's thesis statement. When reality gets too heavy, look away. When the truth gets too close, change the subject. When the pain gets too real, cut to something funny. And if you do it long enough, if you do it consistently enough, if you build an entire show around the principle that nothing has to be dealt with because there's always a joke waiting to replace the feeling, then you can run forever. 25 years, 400 episodes, 3 hours of mysteries and theories, and not a single one of them ever has to be resolved. That's what the floating timeline really is. It's not a production convention. It's avoidance elevated to a structural principle. The characters don't age because aging means confronting the passage of time. Time passing means consequences accumulating. Consequences accumulating means having to deal with them. And Family Guy does not deal with things. Family Guy cuts away. The show has imagined its characters in the future. It's done it a handful of times. Flash-forward episodes that show the Griffins as adults, show Stewie grown up, show Peter and Lois as elderly. And every single time the flash-forward is temporary. A what-if, a glimpse through a window that closes immediately. The show looks at the future and then pulls back, because the future means change, and change means the loop ends. And the loop ending means the show ends. And the show ending means the avoidance stops. And the avoidance stopping means someone, some character or some viewer or some writer, has to sit with the accumulated weight of 25 years, of things that were never addressed. And nobody wants that. Not the characters, not the writers, not the audience. We all participate in the avoidance. We tune in every week knowing that nothing will change. We watch Peter be stupid and Meg be abused and Brian drink and Stewie scheme and Lois sigh. We watch the cutaway gags fire and we laugh at them because they're often genuinely funny. And the funny is easier than the alternative. We participate in the loop. We maintain it. We buy the DVDs that brought the show back from cancellation. We stream it on Hulu and binge it on Disney Plus and clip it on TikTok and share it on social media. We keep the machine running. We keep the avoidance going. Because the moment we stop, the moment the ratings drop to 0 and Fox pulls the plug and the last episode airs and the credits roll for the final time, then the Griffins have to face whatever they've been avoiding. And so do we. So what have we actually learned? After 3 hours in Quahog, after 10 segments of theories and evidence, and canonical citations, and Reddit attributions, what is the unified theory of Family Guy? What is the one sentence that ties every thread together? Here it is. Family Guy is a show about a family that exists in a state of permanent crisis, maintained by structures of avoidance so elaborate that the avoidance itself has become invisible. The characters can't see it, the town can't see it, and most of the time the audience can't see it either, because the show has trained all of us to look at the cutaway gag instead of the thing the cutaway gag is hiding. Let's go character by character one final time, not to recap, to synthesize, to show how every theory we've discussed connects to every character we've examined. Peter Griffin. Under the parallel universe theory, Peter is a darker copy of an original who was once capable of love. Under the Stewie perception theory, Peter is how a baby sees his father, enormous, clumsy, dangerous, and fundamentally impossible to understand. Under the trauma theory, Peter is a man whose childhood abuse by his father and abandonment by his mother produced a personality so desperate for approval that he'll destroy everything around him to get a moment of attention. Under the fantasy theory, Peter is a grieving father who made himself stupid so he wouldn't have to understand what he lost. Every reading of Peter arrives at the same conclusion. He is a man in pain who has no tools to process that pain. His stupidity, whether it's a character trait, a mutation, a coping mechanism, or a deliberate choice, serves the same function in every theory. It protects him. It insulates him from a reality that would crush him if he could see it clearly. Peter Griffin is not dumb because being dumb is funny. Peter Griffin is dumb because being smart, in his world, means understanding things that nobody in Quahog can afford to understand. And the show proved this in its own sideways fashion by showing us what happens when Peter's intelligence is engaged. In the crossover episode with The Simpsons, Peter fights Homer Simpson. The fight is brutal. It's destructive. It goes on far longer than any joke should go on. And it works because both men recognize something in each other. They recognize another version of themselves, another dumb father in another dying town trapped in another loop that will never end. Peter and Homer don't fight because they hate each other. They fight because they're the same person, and seeing your own reflection in someone else's prison is unbearable. Lois Griffin. Under every theory, Lois is the person holding the family together, while the family makes no effort to help her hold it. She is patience as a survival strategy. She married beneath her class. Her father despises her husband. Her children need more than she can give them. Her marriage requires her to absorb Peter's chaos day after day after day, with a smile that is increasingly difficult to maintain. The show occasionally lets Lois crack. It lets her reveal that she was wild before marriage. It lets her flirt with infidelity. It lets her express rage at the prison her domestic life has become. But these moments are always temporary. By the next episode, Lois is back in the kitchen, back to tolerating Peter, back to maintaining a household that would disintegrate without her. Lois doesn't change because the family can't survive her changing. If Lois left Peter, the show would end. Not because Peter couldn't survive, because the show needs Lois in the role of the patient wife, the way the show needs Meg in the role of the punching bag. These women carry the structural weight of the entire narrative on their backs, and the narrative repays them by making sure they never get to put it down. Under the fantasy theory, Lois exists in Peter's mind as the idealized version of the woman he lost. She's patient because Peter needs her to be patient with him. She stays because Peter cannot imagine her leaving. She forgives him for everything because in the real world, there was something Peter needed forgiveness for, and he never got the chance to ask. Lois in the fantasy is the absolution Peter is searching for. She is the wife who says, "It's okay," over and over, forever, because Peter needs to hear someone say it's okay, even though it will never be okay again. Stewie Griffin. Under every theory, Stewie is potential. He's the most extraordinary mind in Quahog, possibly in the entire universe, and he is trapped inside the body of a baby that the world doesn't take seriously. He built a time machine, and nobody noticed. He created the universe, and nobody cares. He dropped his accent and showed a therapist his real self, and then let the therapist die, because being known is more frightening than being alone. Stewie is the character Family Guy has treated with the most complexity and the most cruelty simultaneously. He gets the show's best writing. He gets the deepest emotional arcs. He gets the moments that make critics grudgingly admit that Family Guy is capable of real artistry. And he also gets a canonical death sentence. He will lose his intelligence at puberty. Everything he is, everything he's built, everything he's achieved, all of it will dissolve into ordinariness as his brain chemistry shifts and the genius fades and the accent goes silent and the time machine gathers dust in a closet that a teenager won't even remember building. Under the fantasy theory, Stewie is the child Peter never met, the baby Lois was pregnant with when she died. Peter imagines this child as extraordinary because the loss of potential is the most painful kind of loss. A child who died after living at least got to exist. A child who was never born is pure possibility, and pure possibility can be anything. It can be a genius. It can be a time traveler. It can be the creator of the universe. Stewie is the canvas on which Peter paints everything his unborn child might have been. And the painting is the most beautiful and the most heartbreaking thing in the entire show. Brian Griffin. Under every theory, Brian is the most honest character in Quahog and also the biggest fraud. He's intelligent enough to see the dysfunction. He's articulate enough to name it. He's weak enough to do nothing about it. He drinks to manage the gap between what he knows and what he does. He writes to convince himself that his observations have value even though nobody reads his work. He dates women he doesn't respect because respecting them would require vulnerability, and vulnerability is the one thing Brian's intelligence can't protect him from. Under the fantasy theory, Brian is Peter's own intelligence externalized into a form that Peter can interact with without having to claim ownership of it. Peter talks to Brian the way people talk to themselves in mirrors. The conversation looks like a dialogue between a man and his dog, but it's actually a monologue. Peter's smart thoughts are Brian's dialogue. Peter's dumb responses are Peter's dialogue. And the comedy of their relationship is the comedy of a man arguing with himself and losing. Brian's death in season 12 was the closest the show ever came to breaking the fantasy permanently. If Brian dies, Peter's intelligence dies. If Peter's intelligence dies, the fantasy loses its internal critic, its reality checker, its canary in the coal mine. Without Brian, Peter's fantasy has no mechanism for self-correction. The delusion becomes total. The avoidance becomes absolute. And a man lying in a psychiatric facility loses the last fragment of his own mind that was still trying to tell him the truth. Stewie bringing Brian back from the dead isn't just a plot reversal. Under the fantasy theory, it's the most desperate act of self-preservation the fantasy has ever performed. Peter's unborn child, the imaginary genius baby, uses an imaginary time machine to resurrect Peter's own intelligence before it's gone forever. The fantasy saves itself by deploying its most powerful character to prevent the loss of its most necessary one. Stewie saves Brian because without Brian, Stewie would be alone. But Peter saves Brian because without Brian, Peter would be stupid for real. Not cartoon stupid, not lovable stupid. Actually, irreversibly, catastrophically stupid in a way that the fantasy couldn't sustain. Meg Griffin. Under every theory, Meg is the strongest person in the Griffin household. She's the only character who has been offered a clear view of her own situation and chosen to remain in it. She is the only character whose sacrifice is deliberate, conscious, and ongoing. She absorbs the cruelty. She carries the weight. She holds the family together through an act of sustained self-destruction that the family doesn't acknowledge and the audience is trained to laugh at. Under the fantasy theory, Meg's abuse is Peter's guilt. She is the daughter Peter failed. She is beautiful in the real world and ugly in the fantasy because Peter has twisted his memory of her to punish himself. Every joke at Meg's expense is Peter's subconscious flagellating itself for not being there on the night his daughter drove drunk and killed herself and her brother. Peter doesn't hate Meg. Peter hates himself. And Meg in the fantasy bears the weight of that self-hatred because someone has to bear it, and Peter can't bear it himself. Chris Griffin, the forgotten middle child. Under every theory, Chris is background noise. He exists, he takes up space, he occasionally has a storyline, but he never drives the show. He never carries an episode the way Stewie or Brian or even Meg occasionally do. Chris is the most invisible member of the Griffin family, and his invisibility is itself a statement. Under the fantasy theory, Chris's ordinariness in the show reflects Chris's disability in the real world. Peter can't imagine Chris as exceptional because the real Chris wasn't exceptional. Chris had limitations. Chris needed care. Chris was the child who required the most help and received the least attention because Peter was too wrapped up in his own problems to provide it. In the fantasy, Peter replicates this neglect. He gives Chris a generic personality and generic storylines and lets him fade into the background because that's how Peter treated Chris in real life. And the guilt of that neglect, the knowledge that his son needed him and he wasn't there, is one more weight that the fantasy has to carry without acknowledging. Every character in Family Guy is carrying something they can't put down. Peter carries guilt, Lois carries patience, Stewie carries genius, Brian carries intelligence, Meg carries abuse, Chris carries invisibility, Quagmire carries addiction, Joe carries disability, Cleveland carries passivity, and the show carries all of them, simultaneously, indefinitely, in a loop that will never resolve, because resolution would mean someone has to stop carrying and start feeling, and feeling is the one thing this show and this town and these characters have agreed to avoid at all costs. There's a generational thread running through Family Guy that most people overlook because the show buries it under so many layers of comedy that you have to dig to find the pattern. Peter Griffin is not just a man with a broken present, he's a man with a broken past. And the broken past explains the broken present more completely than any single theory we've discussed. Peter was raised by Francis Griffin, a man the show depicted as cruel, religiously rigid, and emotionally abusive. Francis didn't nurture Peter, he controlled him. He punished him for curiosity, punished him for joy, punished him for being the kind of open, emotional, unguarded child that every child is before the world teaches them to close up. Francis was the first person in Peter's life to teach him that being himself was not acceptable. And then in season 5, the show revealed that Francis wasn't even Peter's biological father. Peter's real father was an Irish man named Mickey McFinnigan, who Peter had never met. Peter accidentally killed Francis, and the guilt of that, killing the abusive father who raised him, propelled Peter on a journey to Ireland to find the father who abandoned him. The show played the whole thing for comedy. Of course it did. Family Guy can't help itself. But underneath the jokes about Irish drinking culture and leprechaun stereotypes, the emotional architecture of the episode is devastating. Peter Griffin was abandoned by his biological father, raised by an abusive surrogate father, lied to about his origins. And when he finally found the man who left him, that man wasn't interested in making up for lost time. He was just another flawed, limited person who had failed to do the most basic thing a parent is supposed to do, which is be there. Now connect this to everything else. Peter was raised by an abusive man who wasn't his real father. Peter became an abusive man to a daughter who isn't like her real self, if you believe the fantasy theory. The pattern doesn't just repeat, it escalates. Francis hit Peter, Peter hits Meg. The cruelty flows downhill from generation to generation, picking up speed, losing whatever justification it started with, becoming more senseless and more reflexive with each transmission. And Peter doesn't see this, that's the most important part. Peter cannot see the pattern because seeing the pattern would require the kind of self-awareness that Peter's character, by design, does not possess. He hurts Meg the way Francis hurt him, and he doesn't connect the two because connecting them would mean understanding himself. And understanding himself is the one thing the show, and the fantasy, and the loop will never allow. This is the generational damage theory. Family Guy isn't just about one family's dysfunction. It's about dysfunction as inheritance. Francis passed his cruelty to Peter. Peter passes it to Meg. And if Meg ever has children, under the show's logic, she would pass it to them. Except that Meg will never have children, because Meg will never age, because the floating timeline won't allow it, because the loop won't allow it, because the show won't allow it, because the audience won't allow it. The cycle of abuse is frozen at the exact point where it would either have to break or be transmitted to the next generation. Meg is the end of the line. She absorbs the cruelty, and it stops with her because there is no next generation for it to flow into. The floating timeline doesn't just preserve the characters, It preserves the abuse. It locks the damage in place forever, neither healing nor spreading, just existing in a permanent state of unresolved harm that nobody in the show or outside the show ever has to confront. Peter was hurt by his father. Peter hurts his daughter. His daughter can't grow up to either break the cycle or continue it. And so the cycle doesn't end. It just spins endlessly in a living room in Quahog, on a couch, in front of a television, while a theme song plays that tells you everything you need to know about the show if you actually listen to the words. It seems today that all you see is violence in movies and intimate scenes on TV. But where are those good old-fashioned values on which we used to rely? The theme song asks the question. 25 years of episodes avoid the answer, and the avoidance is the show. It always has been. There's one more layer to this that we haven't addressed yet, and it might be the most important one. The relationship between Family Guy and its creator. Because Seth MacFarlane is not just the person who made the show, he is the show. He voices Peter, he voices Stewie, he voices Brian, he voices Quagmire. 4 of the most prominent characters on Family Guy are performed by the same person, filtered through different vocal performances, different mannerisms, different personalities, but the same mouth, the same brain, the same man. Think about what that means in the context of the theories we've been discussing. If Brian is Peter's intelligence externalized, and both characters are voiced by Seth MacFarlane, then MacFarlane is literally having a conversation with himself every time Peter and Brian share a scene. The dumb version of MacFarlane talks to the smart version of MacFarlane, and the audience watches a man argue with himself without realizing that both sides of the argument are coming from the same place. If Stewie is a baby genius, performing a fake accent to protect himself from vulnerability, and MacFarlane is the person performing that fake accent, then MacFarlane has been performing a performance for 25 years. He plays a character who is playing a character. The layers of artifice are recursive. The accent Stewie drops in the therapist's office is the accent MacFarlane puts on every time he steps into the recording booth. Stewie's confession that the persona is a mask is delivered by a man who has spent his entire career wearing masks. MacFarlane is Peter and Brian and Stewie and Quagmire. He is the idiot and the intellectual and the genius and the predator. He contains all of them. They are all him. This is not unique among animation creators. Dan Castellaneta voices Homer and a dozen other characters on The Simpsons. Trey Parker voices Cartman and Stan and a dozen others on South Park. Voice actors in animation routinely play multiple characters, but the specific combination of characters that MacFarlane voices on Family Guy creates an internal dynamic that is psychologically fascinating. Peter is MacFarlane's id, the impulsive, destructive, pleasure-seeking part of himself that does whatever it wants without considering the consequences. Brian is MacFarlane's ego, the rational, self-aware, culturally sophisticated part of himself that wants to be seen as intelligent and principled, but frequently falls short of its own standards. Stewie is MacFarlane's superego, or possibly his unconscious, the part of himself that is smarter than the rest, that sees the whole picture, that operates on a level that the other parts can't access, and that uses the distance of a fake accent and a baby's body to say things that MacFarlane can't say as himself. And Quagmire is MacFarlane's shadow, the part of himself that he knows is there, that he knows is destructive, that he performs for comedy but recognizes as genuinely disturbing when he examines it honestly. MacFarlane has spoken in interviews about his discomfort with the show's longevity. In a 2011 interview with The Hollywood Reporter, he stated that he believed 7 seasons was the right lifespan for any television show. Family Guy was already well past that mark when he said it. The show is now past season 24. MacFarlane has been voicing these characters, inhabiting these personas, performing these arguments with himself in a recording booth for over 2 decades beyond the point where he believed the show should have ended. and he's no longer the showrunner. MacFarlane stepped back from the day-to-day management of Family Guy around 2010. He's been strictly a voice actor on the show since then, performing characters that other people write for, inhabiting personalities that he created but no longer controls. The father of these characters handed custody to other people and stayed on as a visiting presence. Peter's voice still comes from MacFarlane's throat. The words Peter says come from someone else's brain. That creates a strange split. The voice is authentic. The content is inherited. MacFarlane is performing Seth MacFarlane's characters through someone else's scripts, and the gap between the original vision and the current execution is one of the things fans point to when they say the show doesn't feel like it used to. It's not that the animation is worse, it's not that the voice acting has declined, it's that the alignment between the performer and the material has shifted. The man saying the words didn't write them. The people writing the words aren't saying them. The show has been operating with a divided consciousness for over 15 years. Under the fantasy theory, this split maps perfectly. Peter's mind is generating the fantasy, but the fantasy has been running so long that the generating mind has started to lose control of it. The stories are becoming repetitive. The characters are becoming more extreme. The emotional core is harder to access. The fantasy is degrading, the way a dream degrades the longer you stay asleep. The edges get fuzzy. The logic gets looser. The people in the dream start saying things that don't sound like themselves because the dreaming mind is running out of material, and the system is patching holes with whatever it can find. Now let's close the loop between Family Guy and The Simpsons, because these two shows are not just animated comedies that air on the same network, they are mirrors of each other. And the crossover episode, The Simpsons Guy, Season 13, Episode 1 of Family Guy, is the moment where both mirrors are placed face to face and the reflections extend into infinity. In The Simpsons Guy, the Griffins are driven out of Quahog by a controversy and end up in Springfield. Peter meets Homer, Stewie meets Bart, Brian meets Santa's little helper. The two families interact, compare notes, and eventually clash. The episode's climax is a physical fight between Peter and Homer that destroys significant portions of Springfield and is animated with a brutality that neither show typically employs. The fight isn't just a gag, it's a thesis statement. Peter and Homer are fighting because they represent two different philosophies of animated fatherhood, two different approaches to the same basic premise, two different answers to the question of what happens when you trap a dumb man in a small town and loop his life forever. Homer is the version who suffers gracefully. Peter is the version who inflicts his suffering on others. Homer's show treats him with warmth even at his worst. Peter's show treats him with contempt even at his best. They are the same character refracted through different levels of generosity, and when they meet, the difference is irreconcilable. The only thing they can do is fight, and the fight is never definitively won. The episode ends with a rough truce, both men battered, both families exhausted, both shows acknowledging that they've been circling the same themes for decades without either of them arriving at a conclusion. The Griffins go home to Quahog, the Simpsons stay in Springfield, and the two shows continue running on the same network, on the same night, for the same audience, trapped in the same loops, avoiding the same truths, cutting away from the same discomforts forever. The Simpsons Guy isn't a crossover episode, it's a mirror episode. It's both shows looking at each other and seeing themselves. And neither show likes what it sees. This is the final thing I want to leave you with. The thing that sits underneath every theory, every mystery, every 3 hours of analysis. Family Guy is not a great show. It hasn't been a great show for a long time, if it ever was. It is frequently cruel, often lazy, sometimes genuinely offensive, and structurally incapable of the kind of growth that would make it something more than what it is. But it's an important show, not because of its quality, because of its duration, because of its persistence, because of what it reveals about the audience that keeps it alive. Family Guy has been running for 25 years because America has been avoiding things for 25 years. The show is our cutaway gag. It's the thing we watch instead of the thing we should be dealing with. It's the joke that fires every time reality gets too heavy. And it works. It works every single time. Because the joke is funny, and the funny is easier, and the easier is addictive, and the addiction is the loop, and the loop is the show, and the show is us. Every theory in this video is about the Griffins, but every theory in this video is also about the audience. Peter is trapped in a fantasy because we're trapped in ours. Stewie is performing a persona because we're performing ours. Brian is drinking to avoid the truth because we're binging shows to avoid ours. Meg is absorbing the cruelty because someone in every family absorbs the cruelty, and we all know who that person is, and we all know we should do something about it, and none of us do. Family Guy is not a mirror. Family Guy is a window. And the thing on the other side of the window is not a fictional family in a fictional town. It's us, sitting on our couches, watching our screens, avoiding our lives, laughing at the same jokes, trapped in the same loops, waiting for something to change, knowing nothing will, unless we press play. And now for the part that brings it all the way home. The part that stops being about Family Guy and starts being about us. Because after 3 hours of theories and mysteries and evidence and speculation, the biggest mystery isn't about Peter or Stewie or Brian or Meg or Quahog. The biggest mystery is about the audience, about why we're still here, about what we're looking for in a show that, by its own admission, will never give us the resolution we're waiting for. Family Guy premiered in 1999. If you were 10 years old when the show started, you're in your mid-30s now. If you were a teenager, you're pushing 40. If you were in your 20s, you're approaching 50. An entire generation of Americans has grown up with the Griffin family as a constant presence in their entertainment diet. Peter's voice is as familiar to millions of people as their own father's voice. Lois's patience is as recognizable as their own mother's patience. The theme song, It Seems Today That All You See Is Violence in Movies and Intimate Scenes on TV, has been playing in living rooms and bedrooms and dorm rooms and apartments for longer than most of the people hearing it have been paying rent. And the show hasn't changed. But we have. We're older. We're different. We've lived through 25 years of history that the show has satirized in real time. From 9/11 to the Iraq War, to the financial crisis, to the rise of social media, to a global pandemic, to whatever is happening right now, as you listen to this. The world outside the show has undergone seismic transformations. The world inside the show is exactly the same. Stewie is still 1, Meg is still 17, Peter is still sitting in that chair, Brian is still lying on the floor, the couch is still there, the TV is still on, and the theme song still plays every single week, as if the passage of time is something that happens to other people, in other shows, in other universes, but not here. Never here. And we keep watching. We keep coming back. 25 years of the same characters, in the same house doing the same things, and we tune in again and again and again. Why? The show isn't as good as it used to be? Most fans will tell you that honestly. The golden age, seasons 4 through 8 or so, depending on who you ask, is long gone. The current seasons get mixed reviews. The ratings have declined from their peak. The cultural conversation has moved on to newer shows, sharper shows, shows that don't rely on a format that was invented in the late 1990s and hasn't been fundamentally updated since. But the show is still here. And so are we. Maybe the answer is nostalgia. Maybe we watch because the Griffins remind us of a time in our own lives when things felt simpler, funnier, less complicated. The show is a time capsule, not because it documents history accurately, but because it documents the feeling of a specific era in American entertainment when animated comedies for adults were fresh and exciting and hadn't yet been ground down by decades of repetition. Watching Family Guy in 2025 or 2026 feels like visiting a friend from college who still lives in the same apartment and still tells the same jokes and still orders the same pizza on Friday night. The friend hasn't changed, but visiting them makes you feel like you haven't changed either. And sometimes that feeling is worth more than any new show could offer. Maybe the answer is simpler than nostalgia. Maybe we watch because the show is comfortable. Not comfortable in the sense that it's gentle or kind. Family Guy is neither of those things. Comfortable in the sense that it's predictable. We know what we're going to get. We know Peter will be dumb. We know Stewie will be clever. We know there will be cutaway gags, and we know most of them will make us laugh, and some of them will make us groan, and all of them will last exactly long enough to distract us from whatever we were thinking about before we turned the television on. Family Guy is comfort food for the brain. It doesn't nourish. It doesn't challenge. It doesn't change you. It just fills the space, and sometimes at the end of a long day, filling the space is enough. But maybe the answer is darker than either of those. Maybe we watch because we recognise ourselves in the loop. Maybe we watch because the Griffin family's inability to change mirrors our own inability to change. Because Peter's stupidity reminds us of our own willful ignorance. Because Lois's patience reminds us of our own tolerance for situations we should have left years ago. Because Meg's sacrifice reminds us of the people in our own lives who carry our dysfunction without complaint. Because Brian's pretentiousness reminds us of the gap between who we think we are and who we actually are. Because Stewie's genius reminds us of the potential we once had and the mediocrity we settled for. Family Guy isn't just a show about a family trapped in a loop. It's a mirror held up to an audience that is also trapped in loops. Trapped in jobs we don't love. Trapped in relationships we've outgrown. Trapped in habits we can't break. Trapped in patterns we can see but can't escape. We watch the Griffins repeat the same mistakes every week, and we laugh because the mistakes are funny, but we also laugh because laughter is easier than looking in the mirror and asking why we're doing the same thing. The cutaway gag isn't just the show's avoidance mechanism, it's ours. We cut away from our own lives every time we open our phones, every time we binge a series instead of having a conversation, every time we scroll through social media instead of sitting with a feeling. We are a culture of cutaways. We have been trained by decades of media consumption to escape the present moment the instant it becomes uncomfortable. And Family Guy, which has been running for the entirety of this cultural shift, is both a product of it and a reinforcement of it. The show taught us to cut away, and then the internet taught us to do it faster. This is the final theory, not a fan theory, not a Reddit post, not an attribution to a user with a clever handle. This is the theory that emerges when you sit with Family Guy for 3 hours and let the patterns speak for themselves. Family Guy is a show about the cost of avoidance. It's a show about what happens to people, to families, to communities, to entire towns when nobody's willing to sit with discomfort. The characters avoid their trauma. The show avoids its own depth. The audience avoids the implications of what they're watching. And the result is a loop that runs for 25 years and counting, producing 400 plus episodes of entertainment that is frequently hilarious and occasionally brilliant, and structurally incapable of ever arriving at a conclusion. Because conclusions require confrontation. Conclusions require someone to say the thing that nobody wants to say. And in Quahog, saying the thing that nobody wants to say gets you a cutaway gag, a subject change, and a return to business, as usual, before the next commercial break. The Simpsons is about the American family enduring. South Park is about the American child resisting. Bob's Burgers is about the American family persisting. Family Guy is about the American family avoiding. And avoidance, unlike endurance or resistance or persistence, doesn't build toward anything. It doesn't accumulate meaning. It just continues, indefinitely, without direction, without growth, without the possibility of an ending that feels earned rather than exhausted. And yet we love them. Isn't that the strangest part of all? After everything we've discussed, after every dark theory and every disturbing implication, and every uncomfortable parallel between a cartoon family in Rhode Island and the real families watching them from real couches, in real houses, across a real country that looks more like Quahog every year. After all of that, we still love the Griffins. We love Peter because he reminds us that you don't have to be smart to be worth something. We love Lois because she reminds us that patience is a form of strength even when the world doesn't recognise it. We love Stewie because he reminds us that intelligence without connection is just loneliness with a vocabulary. We love Brian because he reminds us that pretending to have it together is a universal human condition and not a personal failing. We love Meg because she reminds us that some people carry more than their share and do it without asking for credit. We love Chris because he reminds us that being ordinary in a family of extremes is its own kind of heroism, even if nobody writes songs about it. We love the Griffins the way we love our own families, not because they're perfect, not because they're kind, not because they treat each other well. We love them because they're ours, because we've spent 25 years with them, because we know their voices better than we know some of our relatives' voices, because the couch in the living room at 31 Spooner Street feels as familiar as any piece of furniture in our own homes. And maybe that's the real reason the show can't end. Not because Fox needs the ad revenue, not because the writers can't find a stopping point, not because the audience would revolt. Maybe the show can't end because ending it would mean saying goodbye to people we've known for a quarter of a century. And goodbyes are the one thing that avoidance was specifically designed to prevent. The Griffins don't age because we need them not to age. We need Stewie to still be a baby, because a baby is full of possibility, and possibility is the opposite of grief. We need Meg to still be a teenager, because if Meg grows up and leaves, the family loses its foundation, and we lose the version of strength we don't have the courage to exercise in our own lives. We need Peter to still be dumb, because if Peter gets smart, he has to face what he's done, and watching someone face what they've done is painful, even when the someone is a cartoon and the facing is fictional. We pressed pause in 1999, or maybe 2005 when the show came back from the dead, or maybe 2013 when Brian died and we begged Fox to bring him back because we couldn't handle a cartoon dog being gone. Somewhere along the way we pressed pause and we never pressed play. And now here we are, 25 years later, watching the same family in the same house, on the same street, in the same impossible town, waiting for something to change, knowing nothing will, because we won't let it. The show won't end because we won't let it end. The characters won't change because we won't let them change. The loop won't break because we keep tuning in every week and tightening it. Every episode we watch is another turn of the screw. Every laugh is another lock on the door. Every cutaway gag we enjoy is another second we've chosen to spend looking away from the thing we should be looking at, which is not the show, it's ourselves. It's our own loops, our own avoidance, our own inability to let go of the things and people and patterns that keep us comfortable, even when comfortable means stuck. Family Guy is a mirror. It has been a mirror for 25 years. And the thing about mirrors is that they don't show you what you want to see. They show you what's there. And what's there after 3 hours in Quahog, after 10 segments of theories and mysteries and dark readings of a show that most people treat as background noise, is a reflection of a culture that has perfected the art of not dealing with its own problems. The Griffins are trapped in Quahog. We're trapped in whatever our version of Quahog is. And the exit is the same for both of us. Stop cutting away. Stop avoiding. Stop laughing at the thing you should be crying about. Sit with the discomfort. Let the feeling happen. Let the characters age. Let the timeline land. Let the story end. But we won't. And they won't. And the show will keep running, and the loop will keep turning, and the cutaways will keep firing, and Peter will keep being dumb, and Meg will keep being hurt.